Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted in person and as a courtesy via remote means in accordance with applicable law. Please note that while an option for remote attendance and/or participation is being provided as a courtesy to the public and board members, the meeting will not be suspended or terminated if technological problems interrupt the virtual broadcast unless required by law. Members of the public who wish to watch this meeting may do so viewing the Duxbury Government Access Channels, Verizon 39 or Comcast 9, and viewers can visit www.pac-tv.org/Duxbury for information about Duxbury programming, including streaming and watching replays on Duxbury YouTube. With that, I call this meeting to order, and our first order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next item on the agenda is open forum. If there are any members of the public who would like to bring up something that they would like on a future agenda, they may do so at the podium. We cannot deliberate about this issue, so please don't take offense that we cannot respond to you substantively. We will consider it for a future agenda item if necessary or if requested. So with that, are there any members of the public who would like to speak? You could introduce yourself, name and street.
Hello, my name is Sheila Lynch Bentinen. I live at 344 West Street, Duxbury, and I would like the Select Board to take this topic up at a future agenda. I'm moving from inquisitive in 2016 to concerned in 2018 to action in 2022 to being very mad today. Today there was an accident at Cox Corner this morning. A turquoise Toyota SUV flipped totally over, and once again the Duxbury Fire Department had to use the jaws of life at Cox Corner to save a person. Luckily the airbag went off and the person will live, and they were just sent to the hospital. But there have been fatalities at Cox Corner and serious accidents with many injuries and many car crashes. I first inquired about Cox Corner in 2016, which is now 8 years ago. That summer, on June 29th, there was a serious accident. July 4th, there was a serious accident. And then July 21st, there was a serious accident. And I wondered why there was not a light or some sort of traffic calming at Cox Corner. And I was told that in order to fund anything at that intersection, it's a state road and would have to go to the local state rep and state senator. I also contacted the planning board and the town of Duxbury, and Senator O'Connor responded, and the Old Colony Planning Council did a study of Tremont Street and recommended in 2018 that lights be put at what is now exit 10, or now exit 20, but was exit 10 intersection. A light be put at Tremont and Chestnut near the Catholic Church, and some light be put at Cox Corner. They did a list of all the accidents. The state DPW notified that it was a serious issue. And then I was notified by Josh Cutler that it needed to go through the town select board and the town highway committee to recommend to the state DPW that they take action. And I was told that was going to happen. And then in 2022, more accidents, and Senator O'Connor funded another study, and that study was done in 2022. It was during COVID. There was more than 20 traffic experts who participated, and they came up with a list of recommendations. And one was a overhead light, yellow on one side, red on the other, and I have both reports. And I have the list of accidents, and they listed over 28 serious accidents that required hospitalization between 2017 and 2022. And I called, annoyingly, Senator O'Connor again, and was told that the state DPW was told that Duxbury wants to be a one-light town and wants roundabouts at exit 10, which I know the town is working on, Chestnut Street and Cox Corner, but that the state DPW in Taunton said roundabouts are very expensive, take long years of funding, and then long years of construction. So, and I have a list of all the actions, Facebook posts. There's been 20 years of Facebook posts. Another accident at Cox Corner, a serious crash. My kids were in the car. I did my, great aunt got slammed at Cox Corner. It goes on and on and on. So I've been complaining since 2016, and today's serious accident, where the person almost died, but luckily they didn't, is just another reminder that there's no action at Cox Corner. And I have reports, emails to town officials, emails to state senators, emails to state rep, emails to Taunton, and I think it's getting to the point of negligence, and the town of Duxbury has to take action. And I don't know who the mysterious committee is saying that we're a one-light town and we only want roundabouts everywhere else, but that is really negligent with the number of accidents. And I called the fire department this afternoon, and I asked them how many jaws of life at these intersections, and they said many. We go to the exit 20 intersection, the Chestnut Street intersection, but most to the Cox Corner intersection. So our personnel at the fire department spent all morning at a Jaws of Life at Cox Corner again, after 8 years of reports that something needs to be done. It has to be generated from the select board with the highway department, Duxbury Highway Department's blessing. It has to go to Senator O'Connor to be put in the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Bond, and it has to have action. And right now, the funding for the 2 roundabouts at exit 10 are in the 2026 TIP, but they're not funded. And then they take years for construction. So the 3 intersections, and the fire department said, we've been told that Duxbury only wants to be a stoplight town, and they want roundabouts, and that's why our Jaws of Life are called to these intersections all the time. And the staff at the fire department anonymously said, it's ridiculous the number of Jaws of Life at Cox Corner. So I'm imploring the select people to put the agenda item to write a letter to Senator O'Connor and the state DPW that they want lights at the items that the Old Colony Planning Council have identified, and that this, rumor that we don't want lights in Duxbury and we only want one stoplight is going to lead to more deaths and accidents, and it's really unfortunate. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, without engaging, I'm just going to reply to the things that I do know. One, rumors are just that, rumors, about this, the statement that Duxbury only wants one traffic light. A factual statement would be that Duxbury only has one light. For years, this board, myself, the DPW director, the town as a whole, have tried to have lights installed at several places. Over here by Holy Family, we've tried to get one there. We tried to get one at 53 in Franklin. We'd love one down at Cox Corner.
Park Street.
Pick one, Park Street. Pick a spot. We want them everywhere because we know that they do work. However, there are certain thresholds that have to be met at the state level. The totality and the nature of the accidents is one of the drivers in terms of whether they're fatalities or not, and very often there aren't enough fatalities to warrant it. Again, but what I wanted to let you know is before it comes to this board, it goes to another place first, and that's the Traffic Safety Advisory Board. And Paul Brogna, the chair of that, is aware of the accident. In fact, he wrote me this email this afternoon. He had heard about it a couple hours ago. He was told that someone did not stop in the westbound on 139 from Green Harbor and got hit, got hit by a southbound vehicle on 3A. He copied the DPW, and they'll discuss it at their meeting this coming Thursday. They should have an accident report at that time on before. So no matter what you do, the negligence doesn't start with the town. That's where it would end. It starts with the drivers. So if somebody's blowing through that light, and I've been hit there myself while I was towing a boat, it's the negligence of the drivers that are not stopping. That's where it begins.
I'd like to point out the 2018 study justifies the state funding a traffic light at Cox Corner and in that it meets the threshold. The 2022 study that was funded also says Cox Corner meets the threshold of serious accidents and qualifies for funding.
That may be, but those are all state roads, as we both know. And
They're
that's
state roads.
and the town does not work on state roads.
The town doesn't work on it, but before Josh Cutler left, he emailed me saying the impetus has to come from the Board of Selectmen and the town traffic.
And it's been there for many, many years.
Well,
Folks,
Taunton
I'm
doesn't.
just going to ask that this,
Mm-hmm.
we're in
Yeah.
open session here, it's not on the agenda.
It may be on a future
The message
agenda.
is sent here.
I would suggest you start Thursday with the Traffic Safety Advisory Committee. That's where it begins, before it comes here, because they would make a recommendation to
I'm
the
going
board.
to collect 8 years of studies and emails and Facebook complaints and all the studies justifying the funding for lights. But I do think the select board has to put it on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, is there any other open forum issues? All right, moving on. We have a discussion pertaining to grant of easement for Maureen Stamper and Julie Stamper. This is going to be presented by Town Council Sharon Everett from KP Law.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
Might just have
Are
to
you
keep
able
your
to
voice
hear
up a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Would you like me to begin?
Yes, sorry.
What you have before you is this case of Stamper versus the town. And this originated about a year and a half ago when I was working with Joe Grady on this issue that had come up with respect to Pine Point Road. So Pine Point Road comes down, it's a constructed road for a while, and then it veers off into marshland. And if you didn't go into the marsh, then the property, then there's an access way that leads to Stamper's house lot. And it crosses over several Stamper properties, goes over certain town conservation land, and then goes to Stamper's house lot that she's been using and her family have been using for over 50 years, since 1950. So a lot longer than that. So Ms. Stamper has a record easement on Pine Point Road, which is supposed to exist as a way, but it doesn't. It goes through marsh. And so for the last 75 years, she and her family members have been going through this other route, which is simply a gravel way that's used, and it's on the ground. And I'm told that people from the town too use that to get access to conservation land. I know it's not widely used, but were members of the public to use it to gain access to the town property, they would also have to use this access way. And so this issue came about because Ms. Stamper wanted to be able to sell her property, and she doesn't have deeded rights to the access way that she's been using. And she and her attorney went to Joe Grady, and Joe reviewed the facts and it seemed that Ms. Stamper has been using the property for that long, including her family members. And she came to the town to say that, you know, these rights have existed, and to the extent that her property is encumbered by the town's use and our property is encumbered by their use, that we enter into an agreement acknowledging each other's rights on each other's property. So because everybody who has an easement on their property has the right to relocate it somewhere else to a more convenient location, what her attorney and I decided would be best is that we enter into an agreement to relocate the easement from that unconstructed way that goes into the marsh to actually reflect what's on the ground, which is the access way. So what you have before you is a settlement agreement that discusses these facts, discusses the prior use, and the court makes a determination that the easement does in fact now can move to the new location. And we are before you to ask that you recognize that these easement rights exist, and you authorize the settlement of the lawsuit and sign an agreement acknowledging that the easement has been relocated to the new way.
Do we have a site plan that we can put up on the, I was having trouble hearing you, Sharon, and a plan to me is worth it. Do we have a site plan that we can put up? 'Cause,
It's in the,
yeah.
in our packet, but.
It's third to last page. The site plan.
Yeah, that's okay.
Do you have it in your packet?
Yeah, I'm looking
She
at
has
it.
it.
She has it. I think she was asking.
Scanned. Can you put it on the screen?
I was just trying to help people understand what is happening here too, because it is a little bit complicated, and I was having trouble hearing Sharon.
Well, let me start with this. Maybe for formality, are there some general questions from the board that you'd like to raise, or things that you'd like to bring to the public's attention?
I have a number of questions.
Great.
On this.
Why don't you start?
And I actually took a ride out today to understand what this looks like on the ground, because it was unclear to me. Looking at a plan is one thing, but actually going to the site, as many of us former planning board members know, makes a difference. It's worth 1,000 words for sure. So on the ground, after driving down a very narrow Pine Point Road, the easement area, so to speak, begins at one of the Stamper properties, which is along Baker Way, and then it continues through two other properties also owned by the Stampers, then exclusively through town of Duxbury land, ultimately serving a stranded, I'll call it, a stranded Stamper property. It has no access other than the paper street, which, Sharon, you noted, has not been constructed. One thing, and I thought for a second this was a bar exam question, because it's all registered land. And as we know, one cannot derive prescriptive rights on registered land. So when I was reading some language about people were using it for so many years or whatever, that's all irrelevant, because the court has determined the parties' respective rights and obligations already, and those are listed on our respective certificates of title. And I realize that's what brings us here, is they meaning the Stampers, don't have rights of record over the town's property, and the town doesn't have rights of record, at least in the certificate of title that I could find, over the Stamper property. So where that leaves me, and the question I raised to the town earlier that's since been answered, and I'll share it with the group in just a moment, is what's in it for the town? In other words, why would the town grant an easement over what is apparently conservation land
for the private benefit of one homeowner on a very small lot where everything around it floods. And we saw in one of the pictures, it looks like an island, literally. I don't know if that was just high tide or if that was a storm. But this is a very congested area. And the town properties on this plan, and if we're all looking at the same plan, and I had to do colors to differentiate who does what, but the bulk of the easement area is on town property, and right through the middle of it, frankly. So I was trying to determine what rights does the public have, for example, to travel from Pine Point Road to maybe some conservation land in the back of the house or closer to the water. And frankly, when I went there today, it looks to the untrained eye like a private driveway going to a private residence. There's no delineation at all of private property versus the town's land. And in fact, I was disappointed to see that the Stampers appear to be using quite a bit of the town's property as if it were their own. There were boats, there were improvements, there's a deck that impedes. Almost all of the property, at least down by the house lot, which is relatively small, is being used for private purposes. And that I think is unfair to the taxpayers. We're subsidizing somebody's private use of their own property. So I'm concerned that the town is giving up quite a lot, frankly, in, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 parcels of registered land in exchange for what? And I guess the what is avoiding a lawsuit over the parties' respective rights and obligations. That doesn't scare me so much because, as I said, it's registered land. This has already been through the land court. A judge has already determined who has what rights, and no easement appears on record. So the Stampers don't and can't get an easement over the property unless we voluntarily grant it. I'm not saying I wouldn't grant it. I'm just trying to weigh the equities here as to what benefits the town for giving up these property rights. These are public property rights that we're being asked to divest ourselves of for the benefit of a single property owner in a pretty hazardous area. Frankly, I mean, you couldn't build this house today, and it seems like it's a dangerous area to be living in anyway. If this floods so badly, I don't know how we get an ambulance out there if something happens or what have you. So I don't necessarily want to encourage additional use of this area as well by formalizing something that apparently has been informal for 80-something years. So I don't know that I have an answer. I'm very concerned that public property, town property, is being used for private use, number one. And number two, what are we getting in return? And I just don't see that we're getting anything. And in fact, I think, Nancy's here, or she was, maybe she can speak to it. Nancy, if there's, and I'm speaking to Nancy Rufo, a conservation administrator who's in the gallery here, there's contiguous conservation land around here. And originally I thought, oh, well, as long as we can maybe park in a piece of this area and pedestrians can walk around or something, but it was just unclear to me where anybody could go to use the property. I felt like I was trespassing when I drove up that driveway.
Right. So Nancy Rufo, Conservation Administrator. I did reach out to Joe Grady today, who, as Sharon said, he this conversation started under his tenure. And it did start largely because of the use of the property without some kind of an arrangement with the Stampers. Two things that I am concerned about. One, as Brian, you pointed out, there really is no delineation between private and public, and I thought that there was an agreement to have at least a 3-sided fence to show which is the Stamper property and which is the conservation land. And what was the other? And then the material storage that's happening on the property. I also thought that part of the agreement was to clean that up. So that's not allowed on conservation property. So I am concerned that those two pieces seem to still be unresolved. In terms of public access, I'm not aware of public going out to those conservation parcels, and I'm not sure that that was part of the plan.
Right, in fact, to the contrary, it seems like in the agreement, other draft agreement, that there wouldn't be any parking.
Right.
In that area, and so that any additional public benefit that we could potentially derive from saying, hey, we're town, we're pleased to inform you there's this small park, but a park that you can now go use at the end of Pine Point, that apparently isn't something that can be, well, it's not contemplated in
It's
these
not part of it right now.
in these papers, yeah.
Correct. Yep.
So I'm just speaking for myself, I mean, I just don't see why we would do this. And I realize there needs to be a resolution at some point, but I speaking for I have a duty to the town, and I need to get a good deal for the town, and I don't see it here. I appreciate what's gone into it and trying to escalate the issue and try to resolve it, but we all have, we have pretty strong property rights out here, and I think we need to protect them.
Amy?
I thank you, Brian. I think you make some excellent points. I too have reservations. I think, once people in this town are generous with their money when it comes to purchasing conservation land, and it is near and dear to them. So I think granting easements across sensitive lands is a difficult ask of them. And I too, I fear that once you open those floodgates, no pun intended, for this type of easement, more people will ask. And so I agree with Brian. I don't see why we would do this.
Cindy, do you have any questions?
No, just really a comment, looking at the pictures and stuff, I understand that they had been wanting to put the property on the market, but it is just this little tiny island, barely going around the perimeter of the house. It's a lot to give up for, I don't know how long that house is going to be there. I did have a question about I got to get this back up again. Oh, dear. There we go. This gravel area, what is, do you know, Nancy? There's
It's a turnaround.
It's a turnaround?
Yeah, sort of. You turn around on a bike. I couldn't get my car through there.
Oh,
Is it, when you approach the house, is it on the right?
On the right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an extension of, they've kind of extended their property into the conservation land. And I'm pretty sure it's a parking area or a turnaround.
oh, it's quite a ways from the house, according to plan.
Oh, it's not,
Well, it's
is
all,
the house on the left and the turnaround's on the right?
Yeah,
this is actually a lot closer on the ground than you'd think.
Oh.
Looking at-
Oh,
It's a
all
pretty
right.
short,
all right.
pretty short drive from
I wish I'd
Baker
gotten
Way
out
to
there
the
today,
house.
but yeah. Well, I don't know about the final decision, but I would think that at the very least, if the expectation was that the property, the conservation property was going to be cleaned up, and it hasn't been, and there was going to be some fencing that is also not up, that I would not consider it even for tonight. I don't know about the final, determination, but.
That is my understanding, that those two items were part of the.
Yeah,
of the agreement.
because then if we grant it, there's no,
Just,
sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
I just said, that, no, if we don't do that, then there's no reason to, for them to do those things.
Sharon, and a lot's been just said here. We had a little trouble hearing you before. Could you keep your voice up? Do you care to respond to any of this? This is the first we've heard of. This board has heard of this. So I'd like to know a little bit more as well.
Just to respond to your questions about the fencing and the items that are stored on conservation property, I don't think that was ever brought to my attention, or I'm not aware of that. And if that's the case, then I certainly agree that that is beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. And if there are encroachments onto the conservation property, then those should be removed. And if the go back to the Stampers is that the town won't even consider this until those things are done, I think it's a fair ask to say that those be removed. And if that's how you wish to proceed, you know, if Nancy, you could give me a list of what's there, or tell me what needs to be done and where the fence needs to be installed, I can certainly bring that to their attention. These were not things that I was aware of, and I can see why they would be of concern to the town. Now, in terms of getting the easement, it was my understanding that the town also benefits from this easement because it goes over Stamper's property as well. And there are a number of town parcels at the rear that benefit from this access easement that go over Stamper's property. That was my understanding, that it's with the mutual benefit of the parties. If that's not the case, then obviously I think, you know, you're doing the right thing to reconsider this and see if it is in the town's best interest. But my understanding was this is again for the benefit of both.
Right, that's a good point, Sharon, because that's exactly my question. Yes, we would need access or permission from the Stampers to get to our own property from the road. But that's why I was asking, you know, is there a need for public access? Because if we're not going to grant public access, we can get there by boat from the other side. You know, we don't need ground access unless, you know, there was something to get to that we needed a vehicle for, and I just didn't hear any need for that.
So that is correct. There are other ways for us to access those properties. This would be a more direct, easier way if we ever had to reach them. But it's not a must-have. It was kind of a nice-to-have.
Why would you need to reach them? I mean, what would be the?
And maybe in the future, if we wanted to do something out there with parking, or it was just an opportunity to first clean up what had been going on already, and then just add that as a nice to have.
I don't want to send a message that, for me, anyway, speaking for myself, it's not just the fact, I mean, it certainly bothers me that items are being stored on conservation land and that the conservation land is being utilized in any fashion. But I wouldn't want to send the message that that's my only stumbling block here, that because I do think that it opens the door for other conservation land to be, for us to have a hard time to say no to the next person who just wants to get an easement so they can build something else, or, you know, whatever. So that's my concern.
Without naming names or anything like that, is there anything in the pipeline along that kind of slippery slope? Is there anybody that's been asking conservation for such a access?
We haven't had that ask. We have had asks for maybe a land swap to be able to build, which
Right.
The Public Lands Protection Act has made it very, very difficult to do anything like that for good reason. So we were not able to entertain those inquiries. So.
Does the board have any more questions before I open it up?
Just a concern, I guess. I mean, I did, you know, talk about the house being, you know, on an island and all. But on the other hand, and I understand about the, you know, grandfathered in and the, you know,
Recorded land?
the recorded land, thank you. But there is a house out there, and if we don't grant this easement, there is no access to it. And so the people that are living there would have no access to their house, right? So, I mean, they have access, I mean, there's a road of sorts, I didn't go out there now, but if we say, no, you can't have this easement, then they can't get to their house.
But they, in certain conditions. during flooding time. It's not all the time that they can't get to their house.
I
Is that
think that
correct?
road is not, that Pine Point Road has not been.
So he means legally. They
Oh.
don't have legal access,
Right, sorry.
which is why this is before us.
So
just the-
that seems a little, I mean, I would make them, not make them, I would have a condition cleaning up the property and all of that. And I don't know what the fence means, but if that's, if
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah, it was more to delineate their property versus the conservation property.
Yeah, so
'Cause it
whatever,
is very small, their parcel.
you know, it's a tough one because, you know, you don't want to go across conservation land, but they've been doing it all along, and there's no access to this house.
Can I just speak to that for a second,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman? So cleaning up, I think that there's no quid pro quo there. We own the property. Get your stuff off our property, I guess, is, you know,
Good
what I
answer.
would say. And then in terms of the access, we don't know why an easement was or wasn't granted years ago when all this property went to the land court for registration. I ask about public access because that would potentially be some sort of consideration for granting rights that aren't currently existing. In the absence of that, and I don't want to negotiate from here, but I would think at the very least, we would require some sort of consideration, some sort of payment. I mean, this is a valuable strip of land, and the town can't just give away property rights without exchange for anything else. So I mean, I would just say if this board is considering granting anything, the way the paperwork is set up, there's no payment to the town. In fact, it's split, just the paperwork fees are 50/50, which I think is inherently unfair if we're giving everything up and we're not getting anything in return.
Agreed.
I know that we've received, lack of a better word, donations for some land to this board even. Are any of these, do we have a history on why some of these are town of Duxbury land, or is it recent? Because if neighbors owned them in the past, maybe that's why there was no easement in the past?
I do not know that off the top of my head.
Okay.
I could find that out, though.
All right, just wondering. But I have no further questions, but I'm happy to entertain questions from the audience.
I'm not a lawyer. Sheila Lynch Benton, 344 West Street. But there's lawyers on the board. But there's this, I was involved in an issue similar to this with a neighbor who used part of our land, and it ended up at a law office. And there's this Part 2, Title 1, Chapter 187, Section 2, no person shall acquire by adverse use or enjoyment a right or privilege of way or other easement from, in, or upon Massachusetts land law over the land of another unless such use or enjoyment is continued uninterruptedly for 20 years. And just anecdotally, you mentioned the Stampers have been using this 80 years. So haven't they qualified
Nope.
at 20 years?
Because it's not.
That's why I said it was like a bar exam
Registered
question,
land.
because
Oh.
you can't, that doesn't apply to registered
I'm
land.
not the lawyer, you are, yeah.
Yeah.
So this doesn't apply to
Doesn't-
conservation land?
No, it doesn't apply to registered land. Registered land is a type of ownership in Massachusetts.
So even though they've used this for 80 years, they have no rights?
Correct. The only rights in registered land are the rights that are set forth in something called a certificate of title.
I will stop with the bar exam.
Okay, yeah. So, and there are no rights there are no easement rights on our certificate of title for any right for them to pass and repass, which is my point. It's open and shut from my perspective in terms of who has what rights. The court has already declared it in the earlier registration case.
Are there any other questions from the audience? I think this was a thoughtful discussion with Sharon here, and I really appreciate the comments. I don't think we should be voting on this tonight unless there's a timeline issue. Is there any timeline? I know this is before court, so were you supposed to report back to the court this week or anything?
Yes, their attorney was hoping to get the documents to sign the agreement for judgment and to get them before the court.
I guess what I'm
There's
asking,
this
there's no
conflict
time
between
standards on,
waiting.
it's just a want, not a requirement? Okay.
That's
It's
my
okay if we
understanding.
step this back?
Correct.
Can we step this back? Okay,
Yes, we can.
all right. I think we should do that then. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon.
The next is our discussion with Duxbury Beach Reservation regarding beach access.
Mr. Chairman, Bruno McGlathry is here with a presentation. You all have copies of it, the most recent version of which is in front of you.
If you just introduce yourself and who you represent, that would be great.
I think I was definitely hitting this. Hi, my name's Brenna McGlathry. I'm the Assistant Director for Duxbury Beach Reservation. So I'm going to talk a bit about the state's habitat conservation plan for piping plovers and specifically Duxbury Beach's inclusion in that plan and how it benefits access and kind of what the options are for us out on the beach under that plan. So this time of year, a big discussion is beach closures, when they're going to start, what they're going to be. So I wanted to run through that real quick as a reminder of kind of what the main reasons are that there might be restrictions or closures on parts of the beach during the nesting season. So that's where nests, so eggs, are located relative to recreational areas, where chicks are located relative to recreational areas, and where chicks are located relative to roads and parking lots. So these restrictions or these setbacks have been in place for decades. It's just been a lot less noticeable. In 2023, there were around 1,700 pairs of piping plovers in Massachusetts. 10 years ago, there were around 600. 30 years ago, there were fewer than 400. And a similar trend is true on Duxbury Beach as well. So that's where the state's habitat conservation plan comes in. It's allowing us to address those restrictions, but in a limited fashion. So there's no denying that it's still an uphill battle in terms of access during the nesting season. So the HCP and DBR's participation in the state program came at kind of a tipping point for bird activity when OSV closure specifically really began increasing. And I think that's led to some misunderstandings that there's a connection between the HCP and the closures versus the closures and those increasing bird numbers statewide and on the beach. So questions have come up if the HCP somehow made restrictions more strict on the beach or made these closures happen, changed the management somehow. So that is false. On the state's website, it says, the purpose of this plan relative to beach access is to maintain and improve. And the same holds true with our inclusion in that habitat conservation plan. So just in a nutshell, the state has requested what's called an incidental take permit through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So that's what they wrote that habitat conservation plan to get, was to get that incidental take permit. In turn, they can give out certificates of inclusion, so kind of sub-permits to folks who request it, like Duxbury Beach Reservation as the landowner, so different beaches, along with the state equivalent for lease turns called the Conservation and Management Permit. And that's because nesting kind of goes hand in hand on a lot of beaches for those two species, and it's in similar areas, and there's some similarities in those restrictions as well. So, so in all, we're dealing with, on Duxbury Beach, 2 Endangered Species Acts, the state and the feds, and 2 listed species, piping plover and least terns, both of which are increasing on the beach and statewide. So that's why we're fortunate that the HCP came around when it did. It's giving us a chance to try to manage beyond what the guidelines will allow for, because that's what we were working under prior to the HCP, was the state and federal guidelines, and trying to have access with those restrictions and those protections in place. So if you do a dive into the COIs, or the certificates of inclusion, our permit for Duxbury Beach, you'll see that we've applied almost every year since 2018, put in a new application either to renew the permit or to amend the permit in order to increase the number of birds that we could impact, or to increase our options under this plan. Oops. So in order to participate in the state's habitat conservation plan, the applicant has to submit a request for a COI, and that includes a lot of information. If you've looked at Duxbury Beaches, it is quite lengthy. It has to include things like historic nesting activity, description of habitat, details about how the site is managed, etc. Won't go through all of that, but there are a couple of key parts I want to hit on, focusing on this first one, which is the covered activities and take exposures. So that is basically what we can do beyond the state and federal guidelines in order to increase flexibility for recreation and access. So we have to request how many pairs we want to expose on the beach to each of these activities. Those are called take exposures. You may have heard them called tokens. We like to say sometimes. So DBR's COI, or our request for a COI, includes all 3 available covered activities. There are also more kind of specific activities used to implement those covered activities, like herding, barriers, raking, deterrence, nest moving, and others. And we also have all of the listed activities included in our permit. So I won't go into these numbers in depth, but I wanted to share a look at what was requested for 2024 when we renewed the permit. So we've got the take exposures requested, and that's the number of pairs that we could expose for piping plovers and for lease terns for each of the 3 covered activities. Don't try to add them up because they won't necessarily match those totals. We sometimes put a higher kind of a range, if you will, for each of the covered activities so that we have more flexibility. Because some years we might need to expose more lease turn pairs to, use of roads and parking lots, and some years we might need to expose more to oversand vehicle use. So we've got a bit of a range so that we can increase that flexibility. But I just wanted to note that Duxbury Beach has the highest number of take exposures for both of these species statewide. So the next highest is 15, and that is for a total of 6 DCR beaches. So we've got 24 for piping plovers, they've got 15 for 6 beaches. And then the next highest for lease terns is 20, and 3 different sites have that. So again, far below what we're dealing with. So by far the most important of the covered activities on Duxbury Beach is use of roads and parking lots. And that's because that's what gets us to the beach, right? Gets us to the oversand and to the walk-on, is being able to access the back road and those parking lots. So as we all know, Duxbury Beach is unique in a lot of ways, not least of which is that there's nesting and foraging habitat on most of both sides of the entire barrier. And there's access across between Oceanside and Bayside for those chicks along most of the length as well, which means that they can be going across the road and across the parking lots. And that puts us, out of compliance with the guidelines, and that's where the HCP comes in. So this covered activity allows driving on the back road while chicks are crossing, driving and parking in parking lots while chicks are crossing, parking in the pullouts in areas where chicks could be crossing, herding chicks to reduce stop time when there are crossings. We have barriers to keep parking open, access over OSV crossovers in close proximity to lease turn chicks using barriers and herding, and increased space on the OSV beach in close proximity to lease turn chicks through the use of barriers. So just to give an idea, and I know this is kind of small, but all of those colored triangles represent spots, just single points, so not necessarily the entire space they've used, where birds have crossed, where chicks have crossed over the last 3 years. And you can see it's a lot of the beach. We wouldn't really be able to get to any of the crossovers or the parking lots without being out of compliance with this use of roads and parking lots. So that's where it comes in. So this year, we submitted a couple of new things with the COI under this covered activity. We've increased the option for barrier use, specifically in the resident parking lots. The last few years where chicks have been crossing at the north end, we've had to close some of the parking. We've increased the barriers, so hopefully that won't have to happen. We've requested further decreases to the setbacks between lease turn chicks and OSVs in order to increase space on the OSV when it is open during the nesting season, and then decrease monitoring, which is going to hopefully free up some manpower for work for some of these activities that we hope to increase this season and in the future. So recreation and beach operations, that includes 3 subcategories. 1, reduce symbolic fencing around nest moving, and reduce proactive symbolic fencing of piping plover or least turn habitat, commonly referred to as deterrence. So all 3 of these are included in DBR COI. So this year we submitted changes to the use of this activity with kind of limited success. We were able to increase the number of take exposures or the number of pairs that we could impact with this activity for plovers and terns. We requested an increase to the amount of acreage, the amount of habitat that we could impact for that reduced proactive symbolic fencing or deterrence. However, there is a statewide limit of 5 sites that can have an increased acreage limit. So we were denied as the 6th site to request it this year, with the reasoning from the state that the other sites required this exception for normal operations, which Duxbury Beach did not. So that's something on our list to continue looking at for future years. So recreation and beach operations gets a lot of hype because at first glance it sounds really, really promising. Move nests, deter birds, should solve all our problems. But a big thing I need to keep reminding folks of is that nests don't close the OSV. And all of these activities are focused around nests or nesting habitat, deterring birds before they've nested. So the first one is reduce fencing around nests. Second one, nest moving. Third one is trying to deter birds before they've laid a nest. So again, the nests aren't typically our issue. So just a quick example to kind of illustrate that point. So that red dot we'll call a nest. It's near crossover 1 in this imaginary case. So nests get a setback north and south of 50 meters. As you can see, it doesn't extend 50 meters to crossover 1, it stays open. However, as soon as that hatches, those setbacks increase out to 100 to 200 meters depending on the age of the chicks. And that's not even kind of the worst of it. Those chicks move. They don't stay in one spot. As soon as they start expanding their range, those setbacks expand with them. So it's never just 200 meters on either side of one point. It's whatever that range is plus 200 meters for the first week, or whatever that range is plus 100 meters after that. So even if we were to, move that nest or have deterred it from nesting, it wouldn't necessarily make a difference because another pair might just nest to the south of it. And as soon as their nest hatches, as you can see, that 100-meter buffer, that 200-meter buffer goes in front of that crossover anyways. So I'm not trying to sound hopeless, just wanted to remind everybody that this activity is about nests, and nests have not caused closures on Duxbury Beach, knock on wood, yet.
Britta, just while you have that scenario up, if, say, you're in that plover incubating stage and it's not disturbed, it's not leaving the nest, are there any hard and fast rules or regulations that would prevent a corridor between the high water mark and, say, 10 yards of that nest?
Nope.
Okay.
We, and I'll show on the next slide, actually, if it was, within 50 meters of the crossover, we also have options under the HCP, so that's great as well. But no, traditionally on Duxbury Beach, those nests are laid, the fencing's out, and cars just drive past them. It's when the chicks are there and they move, they don't stay in the fencing. That's when the closures start. If we were closing the OSV because of nests, it would start in mid to late April every year.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just an example of how we could use, and in one case have used, these covered activities. So reduced symbolic fencing around nests. So if a nest is laid within 50 meters of a crossover, we can use this covered activity to reduce the fencing, let's say to 10 meters in this case, and reopen the crossover. We have to do that with increased monitoring and reporting, but it is the first choice for state regulators if there's, a nest very close to a major pedestrian pathway or an OSV access point like this. It was used in 2022 to keep one of the crossovers open. I believe it had to close for like 2 days or something, but there was another crossover that was still open anyways, because we have to wait until it reaches full clutch or 4 eggs, and then we can reduce the fencing and reopen that pathway or that access point.
Brenda, can I just ask, when you talk about the symbolic fencing, that's the orange string with the stakes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. That goes out right before April each year, yep. So nest moving has not been used on Duxbury Beach. It also has not been used elsewhere in the state, but it's important to note that that's because we have not needed to. And honestly, I'm hoping that we never do, because it sounds like a pain. But if a situation like this came up where a nest was laid, in the middle of a crossover or right in front of it, and we didn't have the option to reduce fencing, we could request permission from the state to move that nest. We do have to request this on a case-by-case basis. It's not like a blanket permission. There are restrictions with it. We can only move it so far each day. We have to look for certain behaviors. The state is actively involved in the process, and we can't move it into another pair's territory. So like you'll see that other nest down to the south, we wouldn't be able to move it past there kind of thing. But we could, if we got permission, move it, reopen the crossover. But remembering that as soon as that nest hatches, likely it could cause that crossover to close again when those setbacks expand and the brood range expands. We don't have permission. There isn't an option under the HCP to move chicks or deter chicks from an area. So the third option under recreation and beach operations is reduced proactive fencing, and that is deterrence. So that allows us to leave some habitat unprotected and to actively discourage nesting. The common ways of doing that are using like pallets or cover boards to actually kind of block plovers from the habitat since they lay their eggs in the ground. By putting up flagging to disturb them from nesting areas. That's a picture from Duxbury Beach last year. The bottom one, if you can't see, is from Sandy Neck and Barnstable. And raking, and that can be mechanical raking or hand raking. So there are some limits with this. There's limits to the number of pairs that can be impacted by this activity, both statewide and site-wide. As I mentioned before, there's limits to the amount of acreage that can be impacted, and our limit is 2 acres on Duxbury Beach. If a nest is laid in the deterrence area, it has to be immediately fenced, and chicks cannot be deterred. So again, the goal of this is to try to discourage nesting from areas of kind of high recreational value. So this might mean deterring from a parking lot like was done at Duxbury Beach Park in 2020 with flagging. That was unsuccessful. Or was done last year to greater success near the boardwalk in front of the resident beach with flagging and raking to keep that area open and to allow the boardwalk to go out and the lifeguard stands to go out. And last year was also used on an area between the resident parking lot and Duxbury Beach Park to reduce fencing where some lease turns were setting up to discourage them from nesting, and that was successful as well. So a little bit more about this activity. So over the next couple of weeks, DBR, beach ops, and groups of volunteers hope to set up a deterrence area along about 300 meters or about 1,000 feet south of crossover 2. After that, beach ops will begin raking in the area and with the purple hatches, and DBR will be monitoring the area daily and doing hand raking in the areas that can't be mechanically raked, that are kind of higher up in the dune. So what we've learned from our efforts at deterrence on Duxbury Beach, as well as from other sites that do this, is that it is not easy. It's extremely difficult to deter plovers or least terns from nesting, especially in areas where they've previously nested, which in the case of Duxbury Beach is a lot of it. So plovers have high site fidelity. They'll come back to very close, within a couple of feet sometimes, to where they've nested in the past. Least terns can be more easily disturbed, but they also nest in high numbers and can lay eggs, lay them down really quickly. They're a little less picky. So again, not super easy to deter. So our first step was to look at, we looked at 3 years of nesting historically to try to see if there were areas with lower numbers of pairs, kind of the least dense nesting areas, so that we weren't, up against 5 pairs of plovers that we were trying to get rid of and 30 pairs of least terns. Look for areas that didn't have a lot that we could kind of keep clear instead of fighting an uphill battle. Another consideration was our acreage limit. So with only 2 acres to work with, more narrow strips of habitat were preferable because it could get us further linearly along the beach. So in the case of crossover 2, it's kind of hard to see, but the southern half of this deterrence area backs up to high pines, which is densely vegetated, not piping plover habitat, hopefully, ever, versus areas north of crossover 2 and north of crossover 1, or even south of crossover 3, have more habitat kind of up in the dune and on bayside as well. So it just makes it more difficult. And that linear distance, again, is important because of the chicks. As I said, they move. So chicks require larger setbacks from OSV areas compared to nests, and those setbacks extend outward as the chicks move. So obviously our hope is to prevent any nests from being laid in the deterrence area, but that doesn't preclude nests from being laid immediately north and south of the deterrence area. And once those nests hatch, those setbacks go into place for the chicks. Those chicks, we can't deter them. They can start moving towards the deterrence area, and those setbacks start encroaching on this area that we've tried to set up for OSV access. So our hope, by getting as long of a stretch as possible, is to maximize our chances of keeping a section of OSV open, but that might not be the case. It's not something that we're going to be able to control, but hopefully it will at least clear enough of an area that, closures of that section are reduced at the very least. So the last covered activity is oversand vehicle use in the vicinity of unfledged chicks. So that means that OSVs are able to drive past a limited number of unfledged chicks at certain times of day with an escort. So this activity is new in the COI in 2024. It has been discussed on a number of occasions since 2018, but for many reasons the town decided not to pursue it. There are a lot of challenges associated with this activity and implementing an escort program on Duxbury Beach, really on any beach, but definitely on Duxbury Beach, not least of which is how narrow it is. There's escort corridors, which I'll kind of show a graphic of. But when those chicks are moving, if the beach is narrow, they're much more likely to be within the setbacks of the corridor or within the corridor itself, causing traffic to stop. And just with the amount of nesting on the beach, it may be of limited use. But regardless, given the huge increase in the number of plover pairs over the past few years, it's definitely prudent to have it included in the COI and available as an option when the opportunity comes up. So when writing the protocols this year, we tried to, as we do for all of them, to incorporate as many management techniques as possible to keep both chicks safe, as we're required to do, and keep the escort corridor moving and maximize our likelihood of being able to use an escort corridor. So like I said, the beach is narrow, and it's very likely that chicks will be close by or crossing through that vehicle corridor on the beach. So that end, we included minimum setbacks and the option for herding for piping plover chicks to keep the escort corridor accessible, basically, and options for barriers and herding for least turned chicks if we're escorting through areas with turned chicks. And we're able to do those barriers because least turned chicks don't forage for themselves, so we have more ability to impact their location and their behavior. So like all of the covered activities, there are some limitations to use due to both beach logistics and what's allowed under the HCP. Luckily, we have a lot of examples of this escorting use elsewhere in the state, so we've been able to learn a lot and learn what will be more challenging on Duxbury Beach. So to that end, some of the limitations, the town set a 30 vehicle minimum to open. So basically, if the area available to escort OSVs to will not support at least 30 vehicles, then this wouldn't be implemented. If it's more than that, great, then it can be implemented.
Is there a maximum?
Well, 500 is the maximum on Duxbury Beach for OSV, so
There's no
that
real
would
maximum. If there's an area that can take 200 vehicles that could be escorted, hypothetically.
be. There's no
100
maximum.
Could be split in half between resident and non-resident.
Yeah, but there's no maximum written. It'll be, determined by beach operations because, like I said, there are limits to the number of hours in a day that you can escort and how long it can be open. So I don't know what will be feasible. I think that would depend on the length of the escort corridor, how long you're escorting for.
Got it.
So the 30 vehicle minimum is mandated by the state or the HCP or who?
Us.
No, that was the town's decision to just set
That's
expectations, I
Our
believe.
decision. and-
Below that, it isn't worth it. The logistics don't work. It used to be 50. We dropped it to 30, was it last year or the year before?
Well, that's a different, you're talking about just the regular access to the beach.
That 30 right there. The
That's,
vehicle
we've
minimum.
never done this
Escort.
before.
Well, this is for escorting, right?
Correct.
So yeah,
We've-
there might be a
we've had
different limit.
minimum- We've had limitations on minimum number. Yeah, because it wasn't worth it when we didn't have as many birds, because we didn't have the staff to put out there to monitor.
So we used to wait for 30 people to line up?
15 resident, 15 non-resident, yep. Every time you see a number, you got to cut it in half, because half is resident, half is non-resident.
But how does it work? I mean, how do you know that the escort's going to be open?
So
I have a lot of questions on this. Are we going to be presented with this escorting program when it's finalized? Because I just don't.
This is it.
This is, but I mean, I've seen,
You'll have to, anybody that wants to participate in it, they'll need to take an online, not a test, but
There's a
there'll be
lot of questions. I mean,
Yeah.
online application or whatever it is. We're doing a
maybe-
video production
Yep.
with pac-tv. They're doing the voiceovers and all that stuff to explain to everybody how it's all going to work if we implement it. And it wouldn't be, I think, until August, right, Brenna?
it'll depend on kind of, so yeah, I'll kind of skip through. So real quick, and then we'll go through this. Maximum number of chicks as well that we can escort past, and corridors might have to be closed if chicks are sitting in the middle of them and we can't implement herding for some reason. And then there's obviously weather or high tide concerns. So hopefully this will answer some of these questions, but then happy to go through it more. Also happy to send you, page numbers in the COI and the link to that where it's kind of laid out. And then if you have additional questions, happy to answer them. I didn't want to take up
no, and I
hours of your
appreciate
time
that.
tonight. So DBR staff, the bird monitors, are looking at the nesting activity and the chick movements on a daily, if not hourly basis. So that's how we figure out if escorting might be able to be implemented. So a situation might be, we've got a ton of chicks south of crossover 1 here, but to the north, there's only a couple, and then there's this nice big empty space with no chicks. So the idea would be, you could set up an escort corridor. We would let beach operations know. We would work with them to figure out how many vehicles would fit in there. If it's over their 30 limit, they could decide if they're going to implement an escort corridor. And then DBR staff as well as beach op staff would man kind of the escort corridor in different areas as shorebird monitors and compliance monitors. So then vehicles could go over the crossover, be escorted through this corridor, and be able to park at least 100 meters away from the chicks, because we still have those same setbacks for parking on the OSV. This is just basically to get vehicles through areas with chicks to an open area without chicks. So that's why we run into issues during the meat of the kind of chick phase, if you will, when there's just so many chicks on the beach. Like if you look at a map of brood locations or chick locations on the beach, it just covers the whole thing basically during the meat of that season. So the idea for this is that early or late in the chick phase, when there's not as many broods on the beach, there might be these kind of holes that we can escort to, if that makes sense.
Escort how? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to is somebody going to ride in a vehicle with somebody? Is there going to be a second vehicle on there?
That's perfect. Next bullet. So there's 2 methods in the HCP. There's caravan or self-escort. Duxbury Beach's COI we've requested that we could do either one. That way it just opens up more options depending on the configuration.
Sorry, what are the 2 choices?
So caravan is
which
when
means
a beach staff member would walk or drive in front of a line of cars through the escort corridor and, kind of guide them there, drop them at the parking area. Self-escort is what most of the other beaches use, where the OSV driver has to have someone with them in the vehicle who's at least 16 years old, who can walk in front of their vehicle and escort them to the OSV parking area. So those are the 2 options. We have both included. In the coming weeks, folks will get information about how to kind of opt in or participate in this escort program if it's implemented this year, if it's able to be implemented this year. They'll have to watch an OSV video related to the HCP and read and sign a user guide. That's all mandated by the state and the HCP, and that's required for participation. And just as a reminder, access is limited to particular escort times, so there's 6 hours a day that the escort corridor can be open. So again, in the COI, we wrote in maximum kind of flexibility depending on what ends up working best on Duxbury Beach for implementation. So it might be that there's 2 hours in the morning for going out to the OSV, and then 2 hours in the afternoon to come back and have another round go out, and then in the evening, 2 hours to get those last people off the beach. So it looks a lot different than normal use of the OSV.
So there's no flexibility. If you're out there, you have to go out during a window and come back during a window. There's
Yes.
no leaving if, for whatever reason, just
Correct.
making sure.
Yeah,
Got it.
so that is all in that, and that's why watching that video and reading and signing the user guide is going to be so important, just to set expectations, because this doesn't, like all the other activities in the HCP, it comes with limitations and rules. It's not we can do whatever we want. All right, so in all, there are, like I said, a number of considerations for using these covered activities. So we have to have it in the permit. At this point, we have everything they offer, so check on that. And we have to have the available take exposures as well. We have to have staffing, so that includes a lot of effort by everybody, shorebird staff, beach operations staff, enforcement staff. And then most importantly, we have to have opportunity as well. So like I said, with the nest moving, just because we haven't done it doesn't mean we've chosen not to, right? It's because there hasn't been the opportunity to. So that's where DBR's shorebird monitors come in, who are out there, hours and hours every day looking for that. And the folks are recording information to iPads that's being uploaded so that we have real-time information about where the nesting activity it is and what opportunities there might be now or in a few days or a few weeks to try to get access, always knowing that we can't control the birds and that could change. And it's important to remember this too with the escorting. Just it might not end up being used in a given season because it doesn't need to be. So if the nesting is really synchronous and it goes from being a ton of chicks on the beach and nowhere to escort cars to, and then they all fledge and kind of fly away at once, there's going to be no reason to escort, right? Because now it's just going to be open. Or it might be that the few remaining broods of chicks on the beach are at the edges of the OSV. So again, there's no need to escort. The escorting is really key when there's a remaining brood, by a crossover kind of thing, or just north or south of a crossover blocking access to an empty stretch of beach. Sorry. So the key thing, we got to be prepared to implement. We're looking for those opportunities. We can then discuss it between DBR and beach ops or the town. The town can decide if and when it wants to implement. And then we kind of all do our part on how that happens on the beach. So real quick, just going back to these other three, and I'm just going to run through them right on this slide. There's three other kind of major aspects to our COI request that I think are important to remember. In order to have these exceptions to the guidelines or those covered activities, plan participants have to show that we're managing to the guidelines in all other ways. So that includes discussions of how, dogs are managed, kites, kiteboarding, etc. The HCP does not provide license to do whatever we want. It's a commitment to exemplary management in exchange for permission to make exceptions to the usual rules. So the state's HCP, remember, their goal is to benefit, a net benefit to conservation. So our COI request has to show the same thing. Our COI is really long, if you've looked at it, and a lot of that is the impact and minimization measures. So basically, we're telling the state how we're going to implement these covered activities with as little risk to the birds as possible. Because again, their goal is a net benefit to conservation. So that includes things like signage, staff training, barriers, herding, and things that kind of benefit access as well, but with the primary goal of keeping those birds protected. And then last but not least is the mitigation plan. So we don't get all of this for free. The state has to provide mitigation to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for each pair that is exposed under their incidental take permit. So statewide, everything that they give out. So in order to do so, they require mitigation from all of the plan participants like DBR. Okay, last slide, I promise. So real quick, wanted to mention, as we saw from all these slides, the HCP as it stands is not perfect. We're working with a finite number of covered activities and limits on pairs and acreage, and it can be costly to implement and to mitigate. So fortunately, the state currently has a grant to re-examine its HCP and possibly amend it. As part of that process, they've convened a number of stakeholder groups, including a working group, and they asked DBR to participate in that, which we are doing. So some of the objectives of the working group are to look at new covered activities or new uses of the existing covered activities, what the limits are to acreage and pair numbers, our mitigation options, accessibility and implementation of the COIs, and public outreach. So each beach involved, as I kind of alluded to, is very different from Duxbury Beach. So it's really important and fortunate that we're able to participate in this so that we can advocate for changes to the HCP that are going to help Duxbury Beach, as well as other beaches in the state. But like I said, we're unique, so we want to make sure that this will work for us as well. That's it. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Proper protocol here. I ask my fellow board members if they have any questions.
I do, a couple.
Sure.
When you're doing mitigation or deterrence, I guess, at the parking lot and by the walk-on beach, are you using take exposures for that?
So are you talking about Duxbury Beach Park or at the resident parking lot?
Resident parking lot,
The barriers that are there,
yeah,
yes, that uses take exposures.
okay.
Yep.
All right,
That falls under that first covered activity, that use of roads and parking lots, because we're
okay.
preventing them from using the parking
Okay.
lot.
All right. Were there any there last year?
There were barriers in a number of the pedestrian pathways to keep chicks from moving down. And there was a barrier in the overflow lot where it was dirt and we could do kind of a perpendicular barrier to keep them to the northern section. But this year we basically asked to swing that barrier around the perimeter of the parking lots to keep them from entering in the first place. Because now there's kind of a better crossing area for them a little further north.
Oh,
So we
okay.
could do that.
The areas where you're doing like reduced proactive fencing and whatever with pallets and all, is that pallet project going forward?
I think that will be decided in a couple of days by folks who are more legally and insurance minded than I am. So we just kind of received some updates on that late last week and are trying to work on that.
Okay. You chose the area by crossover two to do the deterrence. And did the High Pines area have fewer, you said fewer nests?
Yeah, historically.
Historically?
Yeah.
And so that's a good, okay.
Yeah, so there's only, in the last 3 years, one pair that has nested in that deterrence area.
Okay.
Versus other areas we were considering were like around 3 or more.
Okay.
So,
Okay. That's it for now.
yeah.
Brian?
Yes, I guess I'll just put it to you. Will this plan allow us to get more families out to the oversand portion of the beach this summer?
That is the goal, but that's going to be dependent on the nesting activity. I don't think, as I said, the escorting is not likely to be feasible during the height of the chick rearing season. It's unlikely to prevent, any closures that would happen. The idea is hopefully that it delays complete closure and then reopens it sooner.
Are there any forecasts as to how this year is likely to shape up as compared to last year in terms of the birds?
I think we've been seeing a steady increase in the number of pairs statewide over the last several decades, and especially over the last 10 or so years. So I think there's a good chance that pair numbers could increase, but we won't know until all the nests start being laid on the beach.
Okay, and just one more, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and I appreciate that everybody's sensitive to the conservation concerns, but I know we're all very interested in getting folks back on the beach.
Yep.
So families can recreate on the oversand section. Is there anything in addition to this plan that we could or should do to get the oversand section open this summer to more families? Or do you feel, not to put you particularly on the spot, but just generally speaking, I guess my question is this the best we can do in terms of ensuring access this summer?
So in terms of for this summer, this plan gives us the most flexibility. In terms of future, I think participating in the state's working group is hopefully going to help us make strides. All the data that's collected on Duxbury Beach gives us better leverage, if you will, to kind of advocate for increased flexibility on the beach, both under this current HCP, which is what we did when we submitted in the fall, was, you know, like I said, we requested even further reduced setbacks from lease turn chicks on the OSV to try to increase it and decrease monitoring to make it easier to get folks over the crossovers in close proximity to lease turn chicks. And that's all due to all the data that's out there that we've collected year after year. So we're continuing to try to use that. We have a lot of like brood range information, so where the chicks are located, because folks are out there. So we're hoping that's something that we can use in future to kind of advocate for new or different covered activities under the HCP. But in terms of for this year, I think it's, you know, when that escorting information comes out in terms of OSV access, watching the video, taking it seriously, reading that guide, signing it, keeping it in your vehicle, and taking it seriously, because this state is not going to hesitate to take that permission away if there's issues with it this year. Duxbury Beach is really narrow and has a lot of birds, so they have expressed concerns of how this can be successfully implemented on the beach. So I think we can only do that with everybody's, you know, active participation and understanding of the program.
Thank you, and I appreciate the detailed presentation as well.
No problem.
Amy?
I have just a couple of questions. The location of the parcel of the beach that we're going to try to deter and then escort, and that was near High Pines. And I think you were asking some questions about that when we came in, because that's where the least amount of chicks. But how many cars would that, with the absence of any nests, how many cars would that section hold? Are we looking at, there's no way for me to know, was that a 50 spot lot, or is
I
that?
think it would be a bit more than that. Do you remember, is it 11 feet now that Beach Ops is using? So it would be around 1,000 feet divided by 11. So
Okay.
close to 100.
Because I guess I'm just concerned if it's realistic that we're ever going to get a swath big enough for the 30 cars, and
Well, this is kind of separate, right, from the escorting as well. This might aid in the ability to escort because there's more likely to be an area free of chicks, but it doesn't preclude us from escorting to other sections. There are other parts of the OSV that have fewer, not fewer, but a similar kind of low density of nesting, but weren't as accessible or had a lot more habitat east to west, so we wouldn't be able to deter as great a distance north to south, so it wouldn't make sense. So there are other spots that have some chance of escorting, to them. It's just when all the nests have hatched and there's that many chicks on the beach, there's only so much space, right, north to south that they can go. They're territorial. They don't just all kind of bunch up. So that's why we're looking when things start fledging for those holes to start appearing and growing.
okay, so just two other things. The predator plan, are we not going to touch on, we're going to talk about
April
that.
22nd.
Okay. And then human activity. Is there any, I mean, maybe this is the silly question of the night, and I'm good at those. If chicks are looking to find a good place to start a family, but there was a great stretch of weather in April and tons of people go to the beach, is that a deterrent in and of itself? Does that?
To the pairs, I wouldn't
No.
think so. Sorry.
Maybe if everybody went to the beach.
It might, though, if there's beautiful weather, encourage them all to nest sooner and then hatch and fledge sooner. That would be great. We like early nests, early hatch, early fledge. On years when there's, a storm that comes through in early June and wipes out half of them and restarts the clock for half the beach. That's kind of worst case.
Well, sounds like we're trying to do everything possible. Yeah,
Do you have any other
no.
questions? All right. Start with the escorting plan. A number of occasions we've been dissuaded from doing it because of all the things that you've discussed. The time, the likelihood that it would even work, the fact that people will be out on the beach, can't leave, and they're going to be watching cars going back and forth from the shack to Garnet Saquewish. One major concern, and I'm encouraged that you said this, is that this would be used as a crutch in the event on like one of these shoulder type seasons when we might be able to get cars out there anyway. And I was encouraged by the fact that you said if we can get cars out there anyway, let's do that first as opposed to using this escort program, because it is arduous. It's not perfect, and we haven't done it before. I think, and this is more of a statement, I hope that if we can get, so many cars out to it, like we had success last year with the Crossover 3, let's just do that as opposed to doing an escort program. So I hope that our town and DBR will look at it that way, because I think obviously we want to get the cars out there unimpeded rather than doing the self-escorting or anything like that.
Yeah, I think our job is, from DBR's side, is to, keep track of where everything is and then say, hey, these are the opportunities available. We'd have to use, this activity to do it, whether that's escorting or what we call use of the crossovers in close proximity to lease turn checks. Doesn't roll off the tongue very well. But there, different things that we might use. So that's our role, is to kind of say, hey, this is where the nesting is. These are the options we're seeing, and then let beach ops figure out from their end operationally what makes sense.
On these deterrents, I hope that we're able to get past any hurdles with legal and insurance and things like that. But on the strategy behind the second crossover, I see all the trucks out there in the sand and everything like that on the first crossover. But I'm always concerned about, from these other meetings, about how there's exposure and liability by, if there's plovers on the first crossover, how do we get to the second? So we do all
driving
these
past.
deterrents on the second, but we can't get past the first. And I'm just trying to understand what the strategy is here. I get the one bird and things like that, but if we can't get there, we can't get there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a big part of our CO application this winter was increasing the number of take exposures overall. So we went from 16 to 24. And that is in large part to make sure that if the back road can stay open, because we're trying to get cars down to crossover 2 or crossover 3, that it's okay that we have the take exposures available to drive down the road where a lot of pairs are crossing. Because, for example, last season, if the OSV hadn't shut down completely and the back road hadn't shut down south of the bridge for a period, we would have used 18 take exposures. We only had 16. So that would have been problematic. But this year we have permission for 24.
Part about the road, kind of dovetail into that, maybe for this working group too. It always seems to kind of come back to the road, and the fact that it's not only just for recreation, it's also people's road to get to their home between two towns. And one thought, and maybe it's a question or just something to think about as a board or as a group, is why is that road part of the habitat at all? I couldn't find it anywhere in the Endangered Species Act or in the CMRs about essential vehicles. It's from the recommendations from the old guidelines from the 90s. And it would seem to me that a lot of this and a lot of the takes that have to be used have to do with the fact that that road is used. And I guess if you took, I was just wondering, if you took that out of the equation, just that travel, would that improve the scenario here? Is that something that can be considered?
So the take exposures, if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're asking are only spent, if you will, for recreational traffic.
Correct.
Not for folks that are going down to their homes in Gurnett and Saquesh.
Right.
That does not impact our use of take exposures.
My understanding was, though, if we open it for recreational use and somebody going out to Gurnett and Saquesh, and there's birds passing across the road, we get takes for that.
Well, you don't get, it's as soon as, we don't spend a take exposure every time a brood crosses the road. It's just as soon as that brood enters the road, they have been impacted or they've been exposed. And so every time that they go back and forth,
Right.
it's just one take exposure though.
Okay.
So it doesn't, if the road is open to recreational vehicles and there are 5, folks going out to cross over 2 and 10 folks going out to Gurnett Saquesh, it doesn't change the number of take exposures that we're using. It's just based on how many pairs have entered that roadway. I'm not sure if that
It's
clears it
helpful.
up.
It's just, it strikes me as, when you think about the idea of essential vehicles, and you look at those initial guidelines,
Yeah.
that it seemed like it was for something along the lines of what's out in Chatham, and where there's like camps out on the beach. This is a road between 2 towns, that people need, police, fire, people need to get to their homes, get groceries and things like that. So it just seems to me that it's being held out in a different way.
So I think that would be proposing putting up a barrier along like all 4.5 miles of the road, right, on either side to keep chicks,
know.
which currently we wouldn't be able to do. Whether we would want to or not, I'm not sure. It might
don't
make
know.
things worse, to be honest, in terms of access,
Yeah.
because it might slow down fledging if they can't access foraging areas, and then they'll either, that brood will be on the beach for longer or they'll fail and the pairs will renest. So it's something that we've considered in terms of like stopping as many crossings, but it really has a good likelihood of backfiring on us in all honesty. So the downside is obviously the number of take exposures we spend with the crossing. So I think that is definitely something that we'll have to think about and bring to the state and see if there's ways to kind of reduce our take exposure use for that activity, if there's any mechanism for that. But in terms of stopping the crossings altogether, it could hurt us. What we've tried to do is increase our ability to herd birds off the road to reduce the stopping time at least. That doesn't take away the number of take exposures that have been spent, but it does make it a little bit easier for folks going up and down the back road.
So can I just, because
Yeah.
I agree that bothers me. It does seem a little hypocritical that the roadway can be used intensely for traffic back and forth to the Gurnett and Saquesh with little regard to the birds at all. There's no, that's okay. You can take 20 trips a day, one person, no problem. Yet, when it comes to the use of the beach for any purpose other than that, so recreation, then it's a halt. It's, even though other cars are constantly going back and forth. It just does seem a little hypocritical there.
Yeah, I mean, in one respect, it's It's a road that the public has the right of access to, and then in another respect, it's considered a habitat.
Yeah, and it is
And it
map
shouldn't
priority
be.
habitat, right? So that's where we as landowners and folks trying to do recreation have to, go under those guidelines and participate in the HCP. Those hundreds of individual landowners down at the end of Gurnet and Saquesh, that's
Rules
kind
don't
of,
apply.
I think a big thorn in the side for the state and federal agencies that are trying to, protect these birds. And certainly is an added challenge for beach ops and enforcement staff and for DBR staff. And something we're continuing to work on, but in terms of how it works with the HCP, we're trying to keep it separate as much as possible so that it, that we can continue to focus on the recreational aspect.
And I think, along the lines of this working group too, the turn has been it's been brought up in forums. It was raised to Ms. Costello at the forum he held at the Maritime School. This board wasn't made aware of it being relisted again or anything like that. I don't know we would get notice, but it was represented that there was the public hearings had already been held and it got listed again.
What
I
got
don't-
What are you
listed?
talking about?
What did-
The lease turns. So the other half of the season is the lease turns, and then that's what's been delaying reopening. Has DBR had any position on attending any of those forums or bringing the concerns of this community about how this has been pushing into August with respect to the lease turns to this working group or to reopening some of those public hearings on listing it?
So in terms of for the working group, there's pretty strict, it's a federal permit and the lease turn is not federally listed. So
Correct.
the focus of that working group and that is the grant that they have. And that's with the piping plover HCP. So some of that will hopefully benefit lease turn, because it'll come hand in hand since they nest on similar habitat and have some similarities in nesting biology. But that we've been told explicitly is not under the purview of the working group to look at, delisting any species. So that wouldn't be taking place at the working group. In terms of DBR's efforts, our goal for years, a big way that we've made headway is with the lease turn nesting and trying to reduce those setbacks and get crossovers open sooner. We've been able to do that with lease turns a majority of years because of our edits to the COI. So I think it's something that we're already doing and definitely have in mind. And with the working group, definitely have it kind of in the back of our minds when we're talking about things to do with piping plovers, which is the point of that group. In terms of, delisting, from what we've been told by the state is that there is not, the data to support that. So we're going to continue to collect as much data as we can. We're working on improving our lease turn data collection protocols for this year to have better information, because that's going to benefit us with our CMP, kind of that state component of our COI and the HCP work. But that's our goal at this point, is to try to make as much headway as we can by improving the data collection and continuing to look for more avenues for flexibility.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't have, does anybody have any follow-up questions or? I'll open this up to the public.
Sheila Lynch Benton in 344 West Street. I have two questions. The possible participant has to print out a visitor's, that they've watched a video and sign it and show it on their windshield. Is that something that can be done electronically? Who's going to monitor the printout? That's, as a user of the beach, is that going to be done electronically, or have you worked that out yet, how that's going to happen? That's question one.
So a lot of that will be handled by the town, so I don't want to speak for beach operations since that'll be going to sticker holders. But the way it works on other beaches is it's a physical, piece of paper, the user manual that folks have to sign and show when they arrive to the beach. And if they don't have it with them, have to go through that process there and sign. So that'll be up to beach operations how they want to handle it on site, given that there could be a lot of cars that are trying to move through an area.
Thank you. And the second question is to Mike's, Chairman McGee's point about the road being critical habitat and the second crossover being the deterrent area. And have you looked at, just from the outside looking in, it would seems like you would want to make the first crossover deterrent and the road to the first crossover deterrent, and then leave the rest of the beach for the piping plovers, and then you could get both the road and the first crossover deterrent and maybe get people using the beach more often. But by doing the second crossover deterrent and not the road, and the road being critical habitat, I don't think anyone's going to get to the second crossover. I've waited 2 hours in line when a piping plover's crossing, and I'm just wondering why you didn't look at the road and the first crossover.
Okay. So I want to try to answer all parts of your question. We can't deter on the road because we're deterring in kind of nesting habitat, trying to reduce fencing and deter nesting habitat. So the road isn't nesting habitat, but it is part of their access to between Bayside and Oceanside, except in areas where there's natural barriers or there's no habitat on Bayside. So for example, at the very northern end of the beach, that's all salt marsh on the Bayside. So that's kind of a natural barrier, if you will. Or at High Pines, some of that is a natural barrier because it's, woods, basically. So we wouldn't deter on the road. We have use of roads and parking lots in order to get cars from, the bridge, let's say, or from the parking lot to crossover 1, or from there to crossover 2. It's kind of the same mechanism. It's just more birds. But that's, again, why we requested more take exposure so that we can get vehicles there. In terms of the wait, we've, over the years, been steadily decreasing the amount of time that folks should have to wait. I think now it's at like 15 minutes before we can start herding. There are always times where staff try to herd a bird and it doesn't want to be herded, and that, can happen once a season and cause a lot of anxiety for that poor monitor. But in general, that should be less and less of an issue because we've been able to steadily kind of decrease that by, again, that data collection that we have showing what the average crossing times are and things like that. In terms of crossover 1 versus crossover 2, I agree. That would be great. That was, our ideal just because it is closer to the bridge. It's just easier. There are fewer birds. Even though we have that mechanism for going up and down, there's fewer that we have to deal with. However, there's a lot more birds nesting around crossover 1. So we'd have a lot more pairs that we'd have to deter. It's also much wider habitat in general, and there's more foraging and nesting habitat in areas of the Bayside north of crossover 2. So that's why we wanted to go with a narrow strip of habitat where there hasn't been a lot of nesting, including lease terns. That's a big one, is that, it's like 1 pair of plovers at crossover 2 in that area versus 3 at crossover 1. But the number of lease terns is around 19, I think, pairs at crossover 2. Don't quote me on this. And I think it was like 50-something at crossover 1 in the deterrence area that we could do. So that was a big, reason right there. And then again, just the width of the habitat that we'd have to deter around crossover 1, north or south of there, would have been a lot greater than at crossover 2. So we can get a longer linear distance, which gives us a better chance of keeping or reopening or keeping open the OSV longer. Hopefully that makes sense.
I don't think anyone's getting to Crossover if you deter.
I think it will be more about the actual deterrence and nothing to do with the road, to be honest. It's going to be about the likelihood of success and the actual deterrence and where the birds around it move on the beach and not the activity on the roadside.
But for long-term planning, wouldn't you want to deter on
They won't be able to hear her, Mike.
beach one?
You might have to stand up. I'm sorry.
In terms of long-term planning, wouldn't you want to deter on crossover 1 and leave the rest of the beach for both least terns and piping plovers, and have crossover 1 deterred and the road to crossover 1 maybe blocked or whatever, and that future recreational use can be just crossover 1 during those important times, and deterrence becomes very intense on crossover 1, and then the rest of the beach can be free for the birds. But by doing High Pines and crossover 2, and then having the rest of the beach be heavy with plovers crossing the road, I just don't see a long-term recreational opportunity for the beach. That's my opinion.
So right now, the acreage limit of 2 acres, or even if it were 4 acres, crossover 1 won't get us any increased access. So in the future, if that acreage limit, expands by, quite a bit, and we can get a huge area at crossover 1 and also have the manpower to deter, then I think that's something to consider. But right now, with the 2-acre limit, and the habitat as it is, it would not make sense to go to crossover 1. But it's a good thought for long-term planning if the acreage limits change.
How you doing? Andrew Marshall, Lantern Lane. Want to thank Brennan, DVR, for a great presentation. It was really informative. We have a great group of volunteers, I think, ready for the next few weeks to hopefully put out some deterrents. I'm really hoping that the resident who's going to donate these pallets, I hopefully can get the legal issues taken care of, so that'd be great. There's 2 real issues at hand here for the beach. One is access for residents and non-residents, and the second is sticker sales. And I think sticker sales is kind of like one of the big elephants in the room we're not talking about at this point. And I'm wondering from the town's perspective, is there something we could be doing, because I sell for a living, is there something we could be doing to send out an email to people in our database, former sticker holders, God forbid, red sticker holders, but say, hey, these are the new deterrents we're thinking of, these are the efforts we're bringing forth, because we really need to sell some more stickers. Without those sticker sales, this is a losing battle. So if we're down to 0 sticker sales, or our sticker sales are not keeping up, we really won't have a beach left. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of database to get out there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we do keep a record of everybody that buys a sticker. When you buy one, you've got to submit your email address. But even with that, there's no promise that this is going to increase access. We could do everything we wanted to, but these are wild animals we're dealing with, and that's something we've been saying for well over a decade. We predicate every message on that fact. These are wild animals, so their behavior is totally unpredictable. The numbers have steadily gone up. We went from 15 or 16 pairs when I started here, and we're up to 46 now, and that's just in less than 11 years. So we really, we can say that we've done a bunch of things. We rely on the media to help us get the message out. This presentation will be on the website in addition to the minutes. The video is available on pac-tv. So we have to be careful what we tell people.
We're not making any promises, but
Can't,
hey,
never could.
never can.
We don't even know if we're going to be able to implement what we've got here tonight, because of the question of the liability issue with respect to the pallets that we want to have deployed out there. That's a tough question to answer, because it's a great idea, but there's an assumption of liability that goes with the acceptance of those, and that's not a town receiving that. We're ready to help
Sure.
move them around on the site, get them off the site, store them in the winter, do things like that. But if we can't get off the ground to begin with, that option just evaporates. So we have to be careful what we tell people. We're doing everything we can. In fact, we've done more now than we ever have. We've got all kinds of interesting options here. The escorting thing we've talked about for at least 5 or 6 years. We finally figured out how to do it, and that became evident to us in 2 reasons: money and manpower. By being able to do that, by having the resources to be able to do that, now we can try it. And knowing how to do it, watching how other places have experienced it. So we're doing everything we can. In terms of that, I think it's a good idea, but I'd hate like heck to give false hope.
Sure.
You know.
I have another question for the DVR. Should those pallets not work for some reason, would staking work? Would staking alone work?
Brittany, you have to step up to the...
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. It is hard to say. I mean, we could cover the entire thing with pallets or cover boards and sand could blow on top and they could nest there anyways, right? We saw with use of flagging in Duxbury Beach Park lot a number of years ago, not successful. We know a bit better now how to do them, have a different configuration. It was successful when implemented last season, short term, in front of the resident beach parking lot. I think that would be our hope, is to, do what we can and move forward with what we're able to. I know the beach ops is working on getting their rake together with the UTV or truck. DBR staff, while we're monitoring, would be hand raking up in areas where they can't rake. So it wouldn't just be the flagging. We'd have more going on as well. But yeah, even with the whole thing covered in cover boards, they can sneak in there. So we'll just have to do our best.
Yes, Martin.
Question about pallets. Can you, what's the issue? I'm hearing we may need pallets, or pallets might help.
Yeah, we have
You
a-
mentioned something about a liability issue?
Yes, the reception of them. Well, actually, I'll leave it to Andrew to explain, or Chris, because it's an issue between the provider and the recipient.
Has nothing to do with this. She's good.
Good evening, Chris Latazzi, Duxbury Beach Reservation. Thanks for all the great questions. The short question is that DBR was just notified late last week that we would need to indemnify multiple companies. DBR is not in the business of writing indemnifications. I have contact attorneys, insurance companies, hold an emergency board meeting because we'd be putting our charitable assets at risk. And when we fundraise, we don't tell people it's for liability. Usually we have people that volunteer their time. They donate anything from sand to a week at their home. Have never been asked for this indemnification. In fact, in 106 years of being in a corporation, and also what we do is we ask people to sign when they come for the beach, if anything happens, if they step on anything, that we won't be held liable. So now we're being asked to do something that we've never been done before, and I can't possibly turn that around in 48 hours.
Okay.
So it'll be up to the board in the end after legal gets through with insurance.
But what's the concern? That somebody's going to fall on a pallet and hurt themselves? And
The
I'm trying to understand what
concerns
the issue is.
range from the person that's donating the pallets, who it's been managed by a third party, to the beach, that they would have some sort of issue if the pallets lodged in the bay or got lost and clogged up the bay or hurt the dune in some way. And then there's delivery service. There was a volunteer group that offered to deliver them, but now they need to be indemnified for their delivery of the item. So we've never run into this before. So unfortunately, it's all planned for Saturday, but because this just came up at the end of last week, I don't know if I can really mobilize an emergency board meeting, as well as our attorneys at Ropes and Gray, and our insurance company to get through all this in 4 days.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is a little convoluted, so I guess in order to receive the gift of the pallets, the reservation is being asked to indemnify the pallet donators
Correct. For the liability of the balance,
for the liability of the pallets.
being on a beach. Sounds like.
It's,
What's
yeah,
that?
sounds very convoluted.
Yeah, I don't know,
I don't know
want to
even
speak to
right
the
now.
issue
I'm
either.
not gonna, okay, I just wanted to make sure I got it on the record so people could understand what
But this is in between the town and,
the town has no.
and DPR.
No,
I
we
think that's,
can't, we can't indemnify people in that.
Okay.
For us, it's illegal. Unfortunately, we're ready to help deploy or whatever and store at the end of the season, but that's about as far as we can go.
Just one thing, though, that we're not going to continue to keep the pallets. So after the season, they'll be taken off the beach by the town and then either stored somewhere or not. So it's a question of who's receiving it. Well, the bonfire, that provider doesn't require an identification, which is being lit on fire, which is more of a
This is the
concern
first
for
time
me,
either
to be
one of us
honest.
This is
encountered this.
bizarre.
We've never seen it like this.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a question of who accepts the ownership and then who's taking it away. So it's a different ownership. So you could even say that we're acting as a third party and assisting the town to ensure that we have access to as many ORV opportunities as we could have.
well, it sounds like the deterrence is a great idea. I hope we can, I don't know. I'm not gonna, I'm hopeful we can do some deterrence.
We
Put it
hope
that
so as well. That's why we brought it up.
I hope we can too, and it does seem as though everybody is working hard to
Yeah.
try to come up with some solutions and creative solutions and make opportunities for, again, to get as many people out to be able to enjoy the beach. I do think that, as we move forward, we see the decline in the beach permits and that revenue, and I do think that probably those glory days are over, and now, we have to understand the importance of the beach to all of the bay and what a huge critical part it plays in coastal resiliency and all the other things and habitats to creatures. So, I agree with Rainey in that, we certainly wouldn't want to misrepresent, people's access out there, so.
Well, we do contract for this, and we do sell stickers, and we do have a commitment to providing access to the beach. And I would also say that the heyday wasn't too long ago. I get updates on my phone from Facebook from 5-6 years ago, sitting out there in June. So, it's not that long ago. But I do want to also, they're not here, recognize the hard work also that our recreation department's doing, and Artie and Steve. It sounds like they're working great with everybody, and I also appreciate DBR working closely with Save Duxbury Beach, Chris Kennedy. I think he's been a valuable asset here, so I appreciate you all working with them as well. This is, takes a village, so I really appreciate everybody working together. We have a question from Allison Shane.
Hi, Allison Shady in South Station Street. I was just wondering, have there been any changes to the predator management plan to protect for the lactating mothers?
That'll be discussed on the 22nd of April.
What, sorry. What,
Okay, I didn't see the answer. Thank you.
We'll be taking that up on April 22nd. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I can move on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
Hate to
you
move
very
on from
much.
beach. We could do this all night, so.
Well, we're not moving that far from the beach. The next item.
We are, yes. Discussion pertaining to the uniqueness of Duxbury Beach.
If I may, Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman, I'll read the memo in the record for you. Dear members, as you may recall from previous years, in accordance with Mass Procurement Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30B, a governmental body is required to solicit proposals prior to acquiring by purchase or rental real property or an interest therein from any person at a cost exceeding $25,000. Further, the governmental body is required to place an advertisement inviting the submission of the proposals in a newspaper with a circulation in the locality sufficient to inform the people of the affected locality pursuant to a number of requisite publication and submittal deadlines as noted in the statute. However, a governmental body may shorten or waive the advertisement requirement if, in the case of a proposed acquisition, in this case a lease, the governmental body determines in writing that advertising will not benefit the governmental body's interest because of the unique qualities or location of the property needed. Mass General Law requires that the determination of uniqueness shall specify the manner in which the property proposed for acquisition satisfies the unique requirements. The governmental body shall publish the determination and the reasons for the determination, along with the names of the parties having a beneficial interest in the property, pursuant to Section 40J of Chapter 7, the location and the size of the property, and the proposed purchase price or rental terms in the Central Register not less than 30 days before the governmental body executes a binding agreement to acquire the property. As such, our office has prepared the following motion for this purpose, which will comply with the statute. Should the board vote the motion as prepared, council will publish the notice in the Central Register for 30 days in accordance with Mass General Law. And there's the motion for your consideration.
Unless there are any questions, this is something we've done on an annual basis. I'd accept the motion.
With regard to the proposed lease by the town of Duxbury of land owned by the Duxbury Beach Reservation, Inc., consisting of approximately 66 acres and including any improvements thereon, and located at and described as all the land and interests in the land and in the towns of Duxbury and Plymouth called Duxbury Beach, owned by the reservation south of a line running approximately east to west along the northerly edge of the northerly parking area at the east end of the Powder Point Bridge and north of the entrance to Gurnett-Saquesh, subject to continuation of the Massachusetts Audubon Society Migratory Shorebird Refuge at High Pines, and excluding the land at High Pines now or formerly leased to Patrick J. Cudmore. I move that advertising concerning this lease will not benefit the town's interest because of the unique qualities or location of the property needed by the town. Such land satisfying the town's unique requirements in the following manner. The property is located immediately adjacent to and comprises part of Duxbury Beach and provides access to the beach. Similar access to the beach is not possible from other locations as a result of the local geography and environmental limitations in the area. And the parcel provides much-needed parking for and access to the beach for members of the public.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All right, moving on to goals. Discussion and vote regarding the setting of select board goals for 2024. This was continued from our last meeting. The board asked that I try to sum up the 5 goals that we outlined during our conversation last week. They've been circulated, and not circulated, they've been provided to us for tonight. And I just will open it up to the board if there's any discussion.
You're looking at me.
I'll
Yes.
go left to right. Yeah, that's been working. I can even, you know what? Should I read them? Or,
Sure, you want me to?
yeah, why don't you read
Here we
them,
go.
Rainey?
Proposed Select Board Goals 2024. Number 1, creation of a town manager appointed working group that will provide regular updates and presentations to the board to develop options to facilitate a sustainable 5-year financial forecast for the town. Garner the consensus of the Select Board regarding the FY26 budget message prior to distribution to department heads. Number 2, prior to town meeting, present a 5-year capital improvement plan to the Select Board, Finance Committee, and the Fiscal Advisory Committee to include a list of all capital improvements proposed to be undertaken, along with supporting data and cost estimates, methods of financing, and proposed timing. Number 3, work with the Duxbury Beach Reservation to help implement and maximize covered activities in the DVR permits, including deterrence, to increase oversand beach access, continue to facilitate transparency regarding beach closures, explore sharing law enforcement costs with the town of Plymouth for essential vehicle travel to the Gurnett-Saquesh area, Number 4, as soon as practical, schedule a joint meeting with the Select Board and Planning Board to provide an update on the status of action items in the envisioned Duxbury Comprehensive Plan in order to implement outstanding action items therein. Number 5, work with the Climate Resiliency Task Force and other necessary committees to advance climate resiliency initiatives, including exploring and presenting to the Select Board potential funding sources. And number 6, work with the Water Advisory Board, Board of Health, and other necessary committees to advance water quality and PFAS mitigation initiatives, including exploring and presenting to the Select Board potential funding sources.
All right, so
Cindy.
for number 3, as far as the beach reservation, that last clause, explore sharing law enforcement costs with the town of Plymouth. I think that it's for essential vehicle travel. I think that should be expanded somehow. It's not just the law enforcement costs that I was concerned about. It's the cost that Plymouth is not paying to use the bridge and the road altogether. So I don't have the language for that now. But I think that I personally, you may not all agree, would like to expand that to go beyond just any potential law enforcement costs.
And I think that got in there because that's the leverage that we want to use, but it would be some type of an intermunicipal agreement
Right,
that we would
yeah.
explore. So I agree with you on that,
Yeah.
that should be.
I mean, it's our first responders. Randy, did you ever get a call back or anything about the first responding? You know, you would.
I've started to look into the goal. I haven't executed it as of tonight.
No, I thought before. No.
I need the goal to happen.
No, I thought some time ago that you had been looking with Chief Reardon.
I have. Yep.
Right, I've heard that too.
About
Yep.
the first responders and,
You
you know,
heard
what
correctly. Yep. I have been doing that.
any outcome
Not
on
yet,
it?
because I still need to know what it is you want.
Oh, well, I
That's
think
what
what we
you're gonna
wanted
tell me
was
now.
the number of
So we're telling them.
the number of times that we have gone out there
Yep.
to provide first responder services.
Yep.
And the number of times they have, at that same time, I think, given us
Backfilled for mutual aid.
backfilled.
Right. That's all part of this answer. That will, once we have the question, then we can provide the comprehensive answer.
But
Okay.
maybe the mutual aid part doesn't have to come into it, because if the
So if you want,
reality.
kick out that last sentence and I'll
the-
just put it on the agenda.
The reality is that we provide services out there that otherwise would be very, very difficult for them to get. And we have asked for nothing in return. And we are finding ourselves, you know, in constant bridge repair. The overage in the enforcement out on the beach in the last few years has really croaked us. And also a lot of the enforcement was necessary because of the actual drivers going back and forth. That has led us to this. So I don't think that we have to say, well, you know, this is how much aid we provided you, and this is what, you know, how many you gave us back. I just think it can be used as leverage, because honestly, what would they do if we weren't?
What did it cost us, maybe,
Yeah, I mean,
in terms of just going out there?
I would think that it would be of value to them to see the importance of the service that we provide to them, and in turn, a negotiation. And I did talk to Jeff Blake a little bit about this at town meeting, and he had promised to be researching, looking into some options. So
Yep,
I
he and I
agree.
have been working on it for the last 2 weeks. I've been doing the same with the chiefs, just putting it all together.
Great.
Might I propose,
Do you want a bifurcated goal?
well, one thing, I toyed around with this sentence too. That last part, instead of saying explore sharing law enforcement costs, just explore cost sharing with the town of Plymouth. Is
Yeah.
just
Fine,
broader.
that's fine.
It seems like it's a lot of the law enforcement, but I think based on my fellow board members' concerns, that might be a broader goal.
yeah, that's fine.
So
And-
explore
Cost
cost sharing with the town of Plymouth for,
The Garnet
For
Sequoia.
essential travel to the Gurney Sequoia.
To cover their costs, yeah.
So just, it's only the, so I say explore, cost sharing with town of Plymouth for essential vehicle travel to the Gurney Sequoia.
All right, so number 4.
Yes.
I think, first of all, it's the Coastal Resiliency Task Force, not the Climate Resiliency. And what that leads me to is to think that it should be, in other necessary committees to advance climate resiliency issues. I think that one of the things we said, and maybe I didn't say it clearly enough, is also to work with the Alternative Energy Committee in their climate action plan, to get those two together. I mean, they're, hand in glove there, right? So, I'm not quite sure what, including exploring and presenting to select board potential funding sources.
So,
I mean, the funding is, the funding's really hard. I think that, that goes back to needing a coastal resiliency planner, because, this is a group of volunteers, not staff people. Looking for funding is a major undertaking.
so bearing in mind that this is a goal for our town manager,
Yeah, okay.
and our
Right,
priorities.
okay, yeah, okay.
The
Okay,
idea
that's
of
all right,
combining the
yep.
alternative energy, would that be something that, as liaisons, that we could work with those committees to kind of work hand in hand as a joint, and then bring it to our board as an agenda item, if there is something that can be brought forward, rather than telling Rainey to tell them to do it?
Right, I'm sorry,
These are
I
board
got
Right.
turned around there right now, so I'm sorry.
yeah, these
So,
are board goals, by the way.
I know, this one I'm trying to, right. These are board goals as opposed to alternative energy goals and climate, so,
No, but we all
How did-
agreed, well, go
Right.
ahead.
no, I'm sorry. Board goals is to be working with, I think, both of those committees
okay.
to advance climate initiatives, maybe. And so who's going to, who are we talking about here when it says, including exploring and presenting to the select board potential funding sources? Who's doing that? Rainey's doing that?
These are all Rainey's goals.
These are his goals for this coming year.
He's saying no.
These are board goals. My goals are in my
Ah,
evaluation thing, what we did.
But
These-
our goals translate into what we
You want me to do
want
it.
you
So
to do.
when you say exploring and presenting to the select board, I would think that the committees that are going to do that, they're going to be the ones doing that.
See, I don't think that's
I don't think that's how we.
reasonable for them to be looking for funding sources.
yeah,
Okay.
so that's
Like,
what,
That's
and that's
our
how I
job,
viewed it,
or-
is that if an opportunity presents itself, that you would bring that to our attention. Say,
Okay.
if a grant, at one point, Rep. Cutler had come up with 100,000 for climate resiliency efforts, and then you provided us a list of climate projects that were going to be done. That would be something I would say would be meeting that goal.
Okay.
For example.
So how would you
I
like
don't know.
this to
I'm
read?
just speaking for myself.
I don't know, because the other thing is, it'd be, and I was at the Coastal Resiliency Task Force this afternoon, and somebody was mentioning, all these different grant opportunities and their deadlines, but we don't know what those are, as a group of volunteers. And it's not necessarily Rainey that knows when, he might, but
We don't have a planner.
this
Could-
goes back to that.
That was my priority. in-
Of getting a, temporary planner, or, I don't know, it just,
In
it's
my-
so frustrating.
It is,
I'm
no.
so
It's the cart
frustrated.
before the horse. I mean, we're kind of chasing our tail here. And so when I passed in my paper, I don't have it, but when I touched on this in my goals, I think that the first thing that we want, that I would like Rainey to focus on, is how to get on board a part-time coastal resiliency, designated coastal resiliency person, or we talked about using the services of a consultant or a consulting firm for this, and how we can, because that's really what we need to assist in everything else that's in this paragraph. I mean, we have to, but, and then you had also mentioned another option, which was that the state may step in with some funding, whether that be
I think-
regionally or.
Well, let me help you. I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to tell you, when we get to my report, that I'm going to be interviewing an interim planning director tomorrow, so there may be an option there. So
Okay.
with that.
But this is a planning director. In this case, I'm specifically speaking to a climate resiliency or coast.
Right, that the interim planning director would oversee. They're not going to be a department head level.
I
position.
understand, but I think, because I really feel like these groups, this is a big goal of ours, and it has to be with the assistance. And you had mentioned, I think, when we had a couple from people in from the coastal resiliency group, that we were talking about this very thing, and that you had mentioned that there was a program that you thought that maybe the state was going to step in. I don't know where that stands, but
That's something a planner could look into,
okay.
because they would oversee that.
I would like
Particularly
us
if
to
we-
not keep waiting to have that conversation. I think we really need to pull the trigger and get some assistance, again, whether that's on a consulting or part-time.
Well, like I said, I'm going to be interviewing an interim planning director tomorrow, so hopefully we'll get somebody on board soon.
All right.
And
So-
go ahead.
No.
Go ahead. Finish
No.
your sentence.
No, I have nothing.
I think what we talked about last week was trying to have a goal that's attainable. It's for Rainey to meet as part of his
Yep.
as part of his compensation plan, for lack of a better word for it. And it's encouraging that, we're hearing these specifics, but I think this is, and I think we should probably maybe come with some language that's a little bit broader, higher level, that he can meet as far as a goal. Is there language in there that you'd like to change to make it more, that would fit
I
some of the
just think
priorities
it's-
of those two committees?
I think it's really unclear, after the comma, including exploring and presenting to select board. I don't know who's supposed to be doing that according to this sentence. It says, work with the climate resiliency. Is that Rainey's going to work with them? Anyhow, it's coastal resiliency, not climate. And other necessary committees, blah, 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 including exploring and presenting. Who's doing that?
So the working with, how I would read that, is if something is ready, it gets put on our agenda, to advance those climate initiatives. The comma, after the comma, including exploring, presenting to the select board about potential sources. In the absence of a planner, that's Rainey, or with a planner, that's Rainey, presenting potential funding sources. That's how I read it, or how I draft, because like you said, to us volunteers in committees to come up with funding sources when they can't write grants, they're not tracking it, it's not their profession, is an unfair ask, and it's just not actually going to get done. But to get it on the agenda is important, to advance these initiatives. That's that working with. And as far as funding sources and things like that nature, that's, our town manager, I would say, for us,
Or grant writer, or
whoever's hired, but we can't,
temporary persons,
Right.
MAPC help. I mean, there's all sorts of things,
right?
but
We're a policy board. We can direct it, so. I'm not, if you'd like to toy with that language, I'm all ears. That's kind of how I read it from our discussion last week.
I'm always, I really am a firm believer, if you'd like some additional time to toy with the language, I am happy to, allow you to do that. I think, I'm so frustrated at missing out on some tweaking of language myself, so I would be the first one to support that.
We do have I'm going to go down the line here, first of all. I want to let other
That's
people.
fine, no, that's fine, maybe
But,
other people, yeah.
you know,
that's good.
maybe, the other end of this, just to bear in mind, is there was because of that, what was agreed to a month or so ago, we're on a 2-week timeline. This was put on this agenda for tonight so that Jeannie could implement the second part of this, which was Rainey makes his goals, I believe, right?
Yeah, mine are already done.
You're already done, and then it's all put together,
Yeah, yeah, I mean,
so.
we can leave it, or I can tweak the language, it doesn't really matter to me. I think it's unclear, but I don't know.
Do you want to just end it in initiatives? I mean, if that's really what you want, to work with these committees and advance the initiatives? Because I heard that multiple times during that meeting.
Yes, but I would love to get something in there about trying to find funding.
The grant writing is such a huge part of that.
But, because nothing's going to happen without funding,
I agree.
and so,
That's
and I
why
just still don't know whose responsibility that is.
we have several board members that need to
No, I
go.
know, but I just want to say we have.
I'm sorry.
Permission to ask a question after. you're
Of
done.
course, yeah, of course.
So, go ahead.
All right,
I'm-
Brian.
In terms of timing, we do need to get this done tonight.
Yeah.
Just because of the timeline, as Mike mentioned. The board's goals, as presented, are generally consistent with my memory of what we agreed to by consensus last meeting. I just wanted to touch upon number 3 for Plymouth, and I agree we need to broaden the cost issue a bit more, and I think what I heard a couple minutes ago is cost sharing.
Yeah.
When I was out looking at Pine Point today, I took the opportunity to go the other way to check out how we're doing on the beach. And as I was discussing with Chris before the meeting started, there's tremendous work that's been going on down there. But I took the opportunity for the first time in a long time to go all the way down to the end at Saquosh and Garnet, and I was reminded, and I took some pictures, there are gigantic signs that are very unneighborly, frankly, that say, roads beyond this
6TV.
point are privately owned. Garnet, Saquosh residents only. All other vehicles will be subject to prosecution. It's interesting, it would be Duxbury who would be helping out there.
Right.
Then there was other stuff like, you're on camera, violators will be prosecuted. Just very unneighborly signs. So that gets me thinking, Duxbury's been very neighborly, I think, to the folks at Garnet and Saquosh, and for anybody going down the beach, it's very clear that there's an us and a them, and we are not to cross that line unless specifically granted special dispensation. And that's fine. They're private property owners, I get it. But I think inherent in that is an obligation to pay for that privilege.
You're here.
And I'm not, when we say sharing, I want to make it clear that it's not, taking whatever it costs and then sharing some component. It's them paying for what it's costing our town to provide services to their private community. So I just want to make that abundantly clear, that when we're talking about costs for providing services to Garnet and Saquosh, I think the town is entitled to nothing less than 100% of what it's costing us to provide those services. My 2 cents.
Is there language that you would like to propose that would make that more clear?
No, I
Brian?
think it was just the word share or whatever.
Get
that
rid of
I think
share.
That implies there's some sort of division. And I get the whole mutual aid thing, but we provide mutual aid to lots of communities. They provide it in kind. I think it was Cindy's point earlier, or maybe, Amy, it was you, Garnet and Saquosh are different as it relates to mutual aid. All services, emergency services are provided by Duxbury.
Right.
So that's different than mutual aid, like, hey, we're having a really tough fire, we need more help. we're basically their fire department and police department, right? And so I think we ought to be, we ought to collect what we pay. I think that's fair.
And I think, I think, this isn't always an us versus them issue either. A lot of Duxbury residents own property out there. They pay for private security, and I think a lot of them would agree with the sentiment that they do only see Duxbury uniforms out there, that they don't get anything from Plymouth. So I don't think it's about the residents. It might be between Rainey and the town of Plymouth here about what is a fair.
Maybe they could allow us to go out there.
I think the reason you see a lot of those signs is the doubling back, because what causes the biggest pain for the oversand and for our recreation department and for DBR is when somebody goes out there thinking they can sneak on and go use a beach, and that's why those signs say
I don't
don't,
think
because they
that,
don't want people doubling back going 90 miles an hour because they're mad coming back.
I don't agree with that, Mike.
I
I'm
never
not
would've
gonna,
thought
I
that.
don't agree
I mean,
with
it's
that.
part of it, but I mean, there may be also the private aspect of it, but what I've also heard is that there's that individual, and they might be an outlier, that go out to the guard shack because they think they can get out there. Maybe they thought they were a guest, and they turn around and they drive faster coming back. And that puts all of us at risk for getting out to that oversand is when somebody does something that they're not allowed to by law. But all very good points about, and I'm open to any. I mean, I was just trying to put this together, and if
No, you did a good job. I mean,
if there's
so-
a word you'd like to change in there, I'm all.
What I
I'm all
would
for
say
it.
is, on 5, is to work with the Coastal Resiliency Task Force and the Alternative Energy Committee to advance climate and resiliency initiatives. And now, if you tell me again, who's doing that work? Is that Rainey?
Yes, this is
Our goal for
goals,
Rainey.
And therefore,
Okay, so then I just, including exploring potential funding sources.
Okay. Would you like him to present them to the board or not?
Well, yes, of course, but
Okay.
I don't, yes, I mean, you
So
can put
just
it that way if you want to, but it doesn't, either way.
Okay, so just exploring potential funding sources. So I have worked with the Coastal Resiliency Task Force and Alternative Energy Committee to advance climate and resiliency initiatives, including exploring potential funding sources, period. All right. And on the, is there any other edits based on your, I didn't want to, go ahead.
first of all, I agree with both. I think that it makes it more clear.
Okay.
No, and which brings me to kind of a general, just, we're always going to be dividing things up in this. Not everybody can do everything, and there's going to be people that can meet and craft these documents and further our work.
Yeah.
But we all can't be there, and we all can't communicate because we're subject to
violation of
open
open
meeting
meeting
law.
law.
So it's important, I think, to, not to get personal with the work that we're doing on behalf of the board, and to accept that we are a group, everybody's vote is just important as anybody else's, and that we need to, kind of work on these initiatives, or not, when we appoint somebody to further the goals, then, we work with that document and come up with, changes, and nobody should feel bad that, that changes are being asked to be made. I just think we need to get past that if we're going to
Feel
work
bad
this
for
way.
I have the very thick skin.
Okay, good.
No.
Remember, my request for changes last week went nowhere. So, the number one, the creation of a town manager-appointed working group that will provide regular updates and presentation to board to develop options to facilitate a sustainable 5-year financial forecast for the town, garner the consensus of the select board regarding the FY26 budget message prior to distribution. Now, I believe that this was everybody's kind of first top of the list, which was the task force to look at the budget, look at the departments, deep dive into our financial situation so as to try to avoid override. I am not sure that this language is clear enough in that regard. I mean, I guess if the rest of the board does, but I think that it's going to be important to get those regular reports back from the 2 members of this board that will be on that.
It might be one. It might be one. It might not be 2. That's to be determined.
Be determined by our board?
me.
By you?
Yeah.
Okay, but these are our goals, so,
And the working group would be mine.
okay. Again, I'm not trying to argue, and I don't want to argue. What I want to do is be able to do my job, which is to best represent the best interests of the town moving
I will
forward.
make
to
sure you're
help.
able to do that, I promise.
Okay.
And, to that point, Amy, on the last sentence, the garner of the consensus, that consensus, especially about override or not override, after we've been given information. I think information is key here, and communication by our town manager and that working group on a more frequent basis. That's why I set the deadline of prior to the distribution of the department heads, so that he solicits our policy feedback before that letter goes out. Because I think that's something that's been, sometimes that letter's already gone out, or.
Right, and I appreciate that. I think
and
that's a
so
good
you-
call.
So if we have
That's-
all the information before then, and we all stand up here in a consensus and we say.
But
let's-
that letter
let's-
typically goes out in November,
No.
Goes out
it
in
goes
September,
August.
August.
August, end of August, beginning of September.
Okay.
So we'll get a crack at this
We have a
in
lot of
summer,
work to do before that.
right? That's why this is a very challenging goal, but as stated.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that goal represented what we were all thinking adequately.
I think it works.
You all right?
I agree. I think the way it's written is fine.
All right. Any other thoughts?
No.
I know Ms. Babcock had a question, so I will open it up to the floor. I know these are, bear in mind, these are between the board and our town manager, so.
Yep, no, I know.
I
Alicia
appreciate it.
Yep, Alicia Babcock, 9 Ocean Road South. I just wanted to, commend this effort. I know this is not an easy job. But as somebody who diligently attends these meetings, I just wanted to kind of give you maybe an opinion maybe. This is a conversation that you all have been having for several years now, and I know the town has got a lot of things to tackle. But at some point a few years ago, there was a conversation about, this platter of things that the board has to tackle, and there's so many things in town that have to be addressed. Obviously, some of them are more priority than others. But at the time, there was a conversation about compiling all of these things together in some sort of a format that was a way to put the puzzle pieces together in terms of everything that has to be accomplished in town, what the timelines would be, how they would get funded, who would lead those efforts, those types of things. I don't know if that was assigned to Chris Ryan. It seemed like he started to tackle some of those things. I don't know if he got to do anything like that. I know that there had been conversations about having fiscal advisory maybe start to tackle some of those things, but it just seems like if we had that piece of information or that macro version of what we're doing. It would be a lot easier maybe for you all to kind of see it as a whole and then extrapolate out of that what you perceive the priorities to be, and also maybe some realistic projects that could get done, maybe that aren't necessarily priority, but maybe are easily tackled, just to start moving some of these things forward. Excuse me. And now that we've got Chris Spillman on board, maybe he could be looking at opportunities if he had access to kind of that broader picture while he's kind of scoping around for some other things. So that's all. I just wanted to kind of
Just to
food for
respond to
thought
that,
kind of thing.
at our last meeting, Mr. Carpenter was here as well.
Yeah.
And that was number 4 on here. We discussed having a joint meeting with the planning board to provide an update on the status of action items in the Envision Duxbury Comprehensive Plan.
Yeah.
Because as you probably remember, we were getting to a point with our planner of meeting regularly and getting updates on the statuses of all those action items.
Yeah.
And it kind of fell off when we no longer had a planner.
Right.
So that's one of our goals for this upcoming year, based on that, is to get back on track with a comprehensive plan. Platter's not going away. I know Cindy wanted to make sure that was,
the
it's still good.
platter's still
Platter's
important.
still full, and there are things that come up on a weekly basis that keep getting
Sure.
added to that, or taken off. So that's not going away. We're committed to continuing to meet that comprehensive plan, but also to address these ongoing issues that keep coming up. And we have things on that platter like updates about the seawall, update about grant funding, update about the DPW lot and things like that,
Yeah.
as reported by the Clipper. All of those remain on our platter. They're still in front of us. They might seem like they're scattered, but they're two different. There's some overlap there, but we'll hopefully meet both those objectives.
Okay.
I mean, we're trying to make everybody happy all the time.
Yeah. No,
right?
I know. Just in an effort to kind of get maybe some other smaller things moving forward
Sure.
too that are
No, I
more
agree.
manageable.
Some of those don't cost any money.
Right. Exactly.
All right.
Very few.
Any other comments from the
No, it looks.
audience?
Oh.
And can I just get on just a question?
Sure.
And I'm assuming this, but I want to ask the question. In the event that something came up that is unforeseen, or something that is on the platter rose to the level of needing it to be a goal, is this a living document that can be amended at any time, or is this a once a year?
Once a year.
Well,
I mean, if something arose that needed our attention, we're going to give it our attention, right?
yeah. And I think, I know there's some language,
No.
and I want to leave, I know Brian worked on this for 6 to 9 months. The whole idea behind this also is to not create a moving goalpost for Rainey. Give him some objectives here, some priorities, and ask him to meet them. But I believe there was some language in there about, and I don't know why it was put in there, but Brian, about amending, or, I don't know. Was there anything in there about amending
No.
goals?
It's in my contract.
Okay.
The goals don't get amended. If we decide to look at the document again, we sit down and have a discussion about it and make sure it's mutually agreeable.
And maybe I'm misstating this. What if a goal is like unattainable, so to speak?
I'll let you know.
Right. That's what I mean. So that goes both ways. Right.
No, it sounds like it's only going one way here, actually.
That's what So I don't remember it. I don't want to misrepresent it, but maybe that's something you can talk with Jeannie about.
The goals are by agreement. Well, we start, to back up,
Yeah,
we establish goals.
correct.
Those translate into town manager goals. Those, I think the word is cascade, the HR term, down to the other departments for implementation over either some short period of time or a longer period of time that it may take for those to be achieved. And of course, to Amy's point, in the meantime, we still have a town to run. So the day-to-day stuff's going to get done. So we're just talking about overarching policy objectives for the near term, what we hope to achieve generally within the next year. and then those translate into goals. So in terms of amending, we wouldn't really amend them per se, and we could add them for next year potentially. But if there are any amendments of the town manager's goals, as Rainey just mentioned, that's per contract by agreement. So we could, theoretically, but the idea would be that when we establish them, and we're deliberating pretty thoroughly on this, so they're thought through, reasonably achievable, and certainly important enough to rise to the level of being board goals. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of how the process is set up to flow. Ready for motion?
I am.
Okay, I move that the Select Board approve and accept the proposed Select Board goals for 2024 as amended.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great job, team.
Nice job. This is a first. Thank you, Rainey.
You're welcome.
All right, so the next item on the agenda is the town manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick updates. Number one, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, got an interview this week with an interim planning director who may be here on a part-time or interim basis, so we'll see how that goes. Just wanted to let you know that that's occurring. Also, the hiring team and I have interviewed a number of applicants for the facilities director, and we're down to 2 finalists, and we hope to finalize that process later this week.
Great.
And the other item I had was with respect to the agreement for the proposed coastal waterbird management contract between the town and Mass Audubon. Council and I reviewed and edited the agreement, and I sent it off to them on Friday, and I'm just waiting to hear back from them.
I'm sorry, Rainey, is this about the
Nourishment.
nourishment?
Yeah, the
okay.
coastal waterbird agreement relates to the nourishment that was done in front of the seawall.
Thank you.
So I'm just waiting to hear back from them for execution on their end. There were quite a few changes, and I wanted to make sure that everybody's interests were protected. They wanted us to indemnify Mass Audubon, and we don't do that. So,
Everybody wants indemnification.
Everyone's like,
Been there?
yeah, it's an epidemic. Could I ask a couple of questions?
You sure can.
I was hoping that maybe these were going to be part of your town manager report, but.
maybe they will be now.
And maybe they could be next week. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I had asked a couple weeks ago for an update on the DPW.
And you'll be getting it.
Okay, is that on for next week?
Nope,
And-
it's forthwith, though. I'm meeting with the team tomorrow.
Okay, because I
We wanted to go out to bid first
okay, out to bid, what, go out to bid?
for the building project.
The building project, okay.
Yep.
One of the other
And they're aware, by the way, that they,
issues that we talked about regarding the DPW was the sand.
Yep.
And that whole thing where we had talked about the possibility of utilizing the sand in
Mm-hmm.
town, whether on the beach or in front of the seawall, or
Mm-hmm.
some things that I personally thought was kind of a great use of our own sand from one site
Mm-hmm.
to another. I'd be interested on getting an update as to where we are with that process.
sure, I'll give you one right now. We had gone out to bid. None of the bids came in that were favorable to the town. We rejected them and made them all part of the overall project. Since that time, I've had a conversation with Chris, and she's going to send me some information that I hope to have available to the team tomorrow to contemplate. I can't say that we would go forward with it, because it's got to be legally permissible within procurement laws. If it is, we may explore it. If it isn't, we can't.
Okay.
Has the footprint for this DPW law changed, and
A little
is
bit,
that
but I'll
locked
let,
in with the bid?
it is, yes, it is locked in with the bid, absolutely, because
Okay,
it's the
good,
square
'cause
footage. Yeah, and when I meet with them again, we're going to get a date pinned down for them to come in and review. They know that they have to come in here and provide an update, so.
Thank you.
They're well aware. You'll see everything.
And then the last thing I wanted to ask about, and again, it was another beach-related issue, which was quite some time ago. We talked about the ramp, and I've been out to the beach, and the elevation on the beach now clearly illustrates why they had a concern about what was going to happen with the ramp, and now you'd have to dig a hole to, so what I'm wondering is, did we make any efforts in that regard? We going to let DBR take that over so they
We
can
made efforts, yes. In
install,
fact,
or-
we talked about it on Friday when I met with them and Sheila, and we're in the process of addressing that now.
Okay, great.
Great.
Now you can delete those.
Sheila did a wonderful job on that pac-TV show. I
Oh.
watched that.
Doesn't surprise me. I knew she would.
It was
Good.
very, very cool, and some nice shout-outs to our community volunteers on there. That was very nice.
Good. I'll let her know. Thank you.
All right. Committee appointments, reappointments, and resignations. Take it away, Brian.
I move that the Duxbury Selectboard appoint Jennifer Klein to the the Registrar of Voters for a term to expire on April 1, 2027.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 The following boards and committees each have one seat available: Economic Advisory Committee, Fiscal Advisory Committee, King Caesar Advisory Committee, Nuclear Advisory Committee. If anyone is interested in volunteering on a board or committee, you are encouraged to fill out a talent bank form, which can be found on the town's website under the Forms and Documents tab.
Absolutely. We're on to announcements.
Recreational shellfish. License applications are available on the town's website under online payments. The current season expires yesterday, March 31st, 2024. Number 2, commercial shellfish license applications. Commercial shellfish license applications are available in the Select Board's office in Old Town Hall. You can apply only during the month of April, and applicants must be a Duxbury resident and have a Massachusetts commercial fisherman's permit showing, quote, endorsed shellfish, unquote. For more information, please contact the Select Board's office at 781-934-1100, extension 5402. Number 3, 2024 Beach and Transfer Station stickers. New 2024 Beach and Transfer Station stickers effective April 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2025 are available for purchase. Stickers can be purchased online by visiting www.town.duxbury.ma.us and clicking the link to purchase under the Services tab on the homepage, or by calling City Hall Systems at 508-381-5455, or by mailing in or dropping off an application and supporting documents to the Stickers Department, Duxbury Town Hall, 878 Tremont Street, Duxbury, Massachusetts, 02332. Applications are available on the town website and inside of the lobby at Town Hall for your convenience. Fourth and finally, the next scheduled Select Board meeting will be on Monday, April 8th, 2024 at 7 p.m.
I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, I'm